Chapter 513. In the dining room of the Duke's mansion. Claire finished the dinner on her plate in an elegant manner as she watched the conversation between Yalvet and Dake. Ever since she became a temporary professor at the Shang Malian Academy last year, Dake had been able to continuously surprise her, even until today. Regarding the two discoveries he described, the first one was related to the gate to the underworld. Although they also noticed the abnormality, they couldn't tell that it was done by a little fairy. The second discovery was even more undiscovered. The Demon King's corpse was stolen right under the noses of the Pope and the others? Yalvet couldn't help but exclaim. Dake nodded. Although it's a bit unbelievable, it's the truth. But since it's the Holy Church, there should be a way to trace it, right? Yalvet took a deep breath and said, maybe. But someone who can steal the Demon King's corpse right under their noses won't be easy to track down. It seems that things are troublesome. Claire licked the sauce on her lips and giggled. But no matter how you look at it, it's the Holy Church's mistake, right? It doesn't matter whose mistake it is. Yalvet shook her head. I thought that things would come to an end after today, but I didn't expect another wave to come. In addition to the possible impact of the temporary connection between the underworld and the present world, we might be busy again. After saying that, she looked at Dake apologetically, like a parent who couldn't accompany their child to the amusement park because of overtime. Website: https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. Fortunately, Dake wasn't a child who clamored to go to the amusement park. He deliberated. Actually, there's no need to rush. Like Aunt Claire said, the theft of the Demon King's corpse is the responsibility of the Holy Church. Since it's their problem, they should bear all the consequences. In our position, we can help, but it's not appropriate to interfere too much. This is obviously a thankless task. Yalvet was startled, then sighed. That's true. Don't tire yourself out too much. Claire smiled and said, besides, even if the Demon King's body is really stolen and used by someone, what can they really do? It was not easy to extract the blood of other demons from the corpse of a Demon King, and it was even more difficult to create a new demon after extraction. The reason why the Devil King was able to reproduce so quickly was because he was the Devil King. But we all know that the real Demon King is probably still thinking, who am I? Indeed. Yalvet couldn't help but pat her cheeks to relax. Let's see how the saint reacts before making a decision. That's right. Isn't it good to sit down and enjoy the show? Dake said in a relaxed manner. Yalvet habitually added more burdens to her shoulders. It was the same for this Demon King execution ceremony. Since the Demon King execution ceremony was initiated by the saint, the chaos caused by the influx of people from all over the world should have been handled by the saint. But in reality, the order of the entire royal city was under Yvette's control. The Holy Church didn't even announce the ceremony to the staff in the church, let alone send people to maintain order. Under normal circumstances, both sides should work together. Dake said again, since the big things are over, let's talk about the small things. Do you still remember the Church of Knowledge? Of course, Yalvet said. We even caught 6 of their elders yesterday. Dake asked curiously, how long are you going to lock them up for? Yalvet smiled. I know that Aaron Leaders and Aviva Julius came to find you. But they didn't commit any major crimes. According to the original plan, they can be released after today. Dake was surprised. So soon? Claire interjected, what they worship is neither an evil god nor a demon, but just some great people with academic achievements. To be honest, I'd rather see worship of great people than belief in gods. Yalvet also nodded. If it wasn't for the special time, we wouldn't have caught them. You know, the saint did summon the gate of the underworld today. We just want to avoid the combined reaction that might happen because of this. Dake couldn't help but smack his lips. If Aaron Leaders and Aviva Julius knew that they didn't need it in the first place, how would they react? But we need to pay attention to the person who reported them to us, Yalvet said thoughtfully. Dake said, I heard from Aaron Leaders and Aviva Julius that the person who reported them might be the 13th elder of the Church of Knowledge. Internal strife? Yalvet frowned. But the person who reported it is just a local wanderer. He must have been paid to do this. Claire said, In short, that person probably knew from the beginning that the saint would summon the gate of the underworld today. This isn't information that ordinary people can infer. Yalvet said, "Let Chris investigate in detail. Is there anything else?" Dake thought for a while and smiled, "Nothing for now." "Then go and have a good rest." Yalvet said gently, "Don't worry too much. Your Aunt Claire and I will take care of everything." Dake replied, "Okay." Dake left the dining hall before their dinner ended. Then, he wandered around the corridor for a while before returning to the bedroom. But as soon as he entered the room, he realized that Eve and Erin were waiting inside. "Good evening, young master." Eve placed her hand on her chest. Erin also bowed slightly behind him. Dake looked at Erin and said, "Good evening, both of you. Which part of the information is it about?" Erin handed the information in her arms to him and said, "It's about Madame Hephaestus d'Oregon." "Okay." Dake received the information, placed it on the table, and said with a smile, "It's been a tiring day. You should rest." "Wait, is there any news about the person who followed Erin Leaders and Aviva Julius?" Eve blinked and said, "After the two elders returned, they locked themselves in the room and took a nap. Then, they began to study the questions that young master gave them." Dake asked, "Didn't anyone find trouble with them?" Eve shook her head and said, "No." "Is that so?" Dake couldn't help but ponder. The 13th elder of the Church of Knowledge was indeed suspicious, but what he did to report was, in fact, correct behavior. Theoretically, there was no reason to hold him accountable. At this thought, he felt a headache coming on. In this world, most things weren't black and white. It was basically impossible to simply make a wrong judgment. After Eve and Erin left, he picked up the information about Senior's mother and browsed through it. The Duke's mansion's intelligence-gathering ability was indeed strong. This information was enough for him to have a clearer understanding of the person, dragon, Hephaestus d'Oregon. Hephaestus d'Oregon was a pure-blooded white dragon. The so-called white dragon was simply a dragon of the light attribute. The difference between pure-blooded dragons and most non-human species was that they had the same high intelligence as humans and were highly adaptable to magic. Most pure-blooded dragons could master advanced transformation magic before they reached adulthood. Not only could this make their huge bodies smaller, but they could also transform into humans. Being able to transform into humans was the key to the intersection between pure-blooded dragons and humans. Hephaestus d'Oregon was once a dragon that served the Church of Light. The service here wasn't slavery or loyalty, but doing things for money. Dragons liked gold and gems, and the Church of Light was very rich. In the later stages of the war, the dragons and the demons completely opposed each other, and joining the human army became the general trend. However, it wasn't easy to have a dragon as a mount. The pride of pure-blooded dragons, like their greed for gold, was engraved in their bones and flowed in their blood. Only the most handsome, noble, and powerful humans were allowed to be their knights. Therefore, pure-blooded dragon knights mostly had noble bloodlines, handsome or beautiful appearances, and top-notch strength among humans. It was even more stringent than choosing a national idol. There were people like that in the Saint Church. But Hephaestus d'Oregon was also a white dragon. As a dragon with the light attribute, she was of course more popular in the Church of Light than other attributes. In order to become her dragon knight, in addition to being handsome, noble, and powerful, one must also have an affinity with the light attribute. There weren't many people who met the first three conditions, plus the fourth condition. Generally, as long as there were no other problems, this type of person would be given a title, Holy Son. In other words, Hephaestus d'Oregon's knight was a Holy Son. Holy Son plus pure-blooded white dragon equals Holy Dragon Knight. Holy Dragon Knight. Roland Patricius's name once resounded through the battlefield and became a hero of the Church of Light no less than Saint Joan of Arc. Until the dragon and the knight were secretly conceived. Turning to this point, Doc could almost imagine the Pope's face. The Church of Light was a firm believer in the pure-blooded humans. They opposed all foreign races and foreign hybrids. Their discrimination against subhumans was deeply rooted, and they believed that subhumans were an inferior species that only deserved to crawl under the feet of humans. Roland Patricius's actions were like stabbing a knife in the back of the Church of Light. During the war, His Holiness the Pope endured humiliation for the sake of the overall situation and didn't attack him on the spot. But after Hephaestus d'Oregon was pregnant, her strength was greatly reduced and she couldn't even go to the battlefield when she was about to give birth. The Holy Dragon Knight no longer existed. Without a dragon, Roland Patricius, the Dragon Knight, finally fell under the concentrated fire of the demons who hated him very much. Once the knight died, there was naturally no need to continue to move to a mount. In addition, the situation of the war at that time was already tilted towards humans, and such a white dragon's combat power was no longer scarce. Therefore, according to the dogma, Hephaestus was sent to Baudia prison. As for her and holy son Roland's child, he was thrown into the forest of exile. After reading the entire information, Dark felt as if he had just finished watching an 8 p.m. melodramatic family drama. His whole body was drained of energy. Should I blame the Church of Light for being cold and cruel, or should I blame Holy Son Roland for not being able to control Dio? Dake reorganized the information and decided to temporarily seal this part of the memory. He didn't think that Senior Panduola wouldn't ask about her background after reuniting with Hephaestus. But today, when he watched the Demon King execution ceremony during the day, he didn't see her and Hephaestus glare at the Pope. If he guessed a little, maybe it was because Holy Son Roland died honorably in battle and wasn't secretly harmed by the Church of Light. Or maybe it was because Hephaestus didn't suffer in Baudia prison. Just like the Blood Princess, Ophelia Bullard, she also belonged to the category of people who were treated well in Baudia prison. Basically, except for losing her freedom, the prison guards would satisfy most of her requests. Or maybe Senior was just more open-minded and had a more thorough study of look to the future. In short, this was their family matter. Since he was sure that Hephaestus d'Oregon wasn't a dangerous person, Dake wasn't prepared to continue paying attention. The only problem was, why did the surname Patricia sound so familiar? As Dake thought about it, his expression suddenly stiffened, and the hand holding the information trembled. Patricia, wasn't that the surname of the current pope? Of course, Pope Patricius St. Patricia was still a young man in his 30s 15 years ago. It was impossible for him to have a son in his 20s. It could only be said that the surname Patricia was indeed noble enough. If Senior Panduola wanted to, she might be able to pull out a bunch of relatives in one go. Of course, she wouldn't. And a theocratic family that strictly adhered to dogma would never accept mixed blood. This could be seen from the fact that after Panduola was thrown into the forest of exile, no one cared about her. Fortunately, in the Dimming family, I am the dogma. Dake shook his head slightly and put away the information. He got up and picked up the magic elves scattered all over the place, throwing them back on the bed one by one. Then, he went to bed and quickly welcomed the next day. On the day after the Demon King execution ceremony ended, Arvette and Claire returned to normal at breakfast time. At one of the two dining tables in the dining hall, the magic elves were uneasily handling the food on their plates, as if they were examinees waiting to be executed. At the other dining table, the two guests of the Duke's mansion were eating together with the host for the first time. Panduola was a little reserved, which was rare for her. She had changed into a new dress that she had bought in the city the day before yesterday. Her bangs were neatly combed, and the two sides of her long black hair were tied up with ribbons, reaching the sides of her ears. This rarely seen outfit made her look a little younger. The tips of her eyebrows and lips were also decorated with the help of the maid. After Dake bumped into her, he asked her in surprise which princess banquet she was attending. She said she was going to the battlefield. Aurora, who happened to hear this, was stunned for a moment before she hurriedly returned to the bedroom and changed out of her home clothes. Today, the Duke's mansion was filled with the smell of gunpowder since morning. 2 in 1 4,000 plus. Chapter 5:14. Even though Panduola had already stayed in the Duke's mansion for 2 nights, this was the first time she and her daughter were meeting the owner of the mansion. Thus, not only did Panduola dress up meticulously, but Hephaestus also changed into a relatively exquisite set of clothes. For the proud white dragon, the so-called noble bearing was nothing more than something that could be displayed with a raise of her hand. She walked into the dining hall with Panduola with a completely different temperament from 2 days ago and gave the Duke a formal greeting. After that, Hephaestus and Yvette began to chat happily as parents of both sides. Yvette was clearly aware of Hephaestus' identity, so she didn't ask any questions. Most of the topics of their conversation were focused on their respective children, like parents who had met by chance at a parent-teacher conference. Hephaestus recounted her daughter's achievements in the academy one by one, her eyes filled with undisguised pride. Yvette didn't fall behind either as she listed all the achievements that her baby had made in the past year, competing against each other. The two who were being compared by their mothers could only helplessly sit in their seats, facing each other in silence. It didn't matter if it was out of etiquette or for some other reason. Remember the URL. Vipkanshu. VIP Panduola had only wanted to leave a good enough impression on the Duke during their first meal together. She didn't expect that the one who would disrupt everything would be her mother. However, when she stole a glance at the Duke's happy expression as he chatted with her mother, she felt that this might be a good thing. At least through her mother's flaunting, her own merits were gradually being displayed in front of the Duke. Dake, who was being compared to her, was also outstanding enough. This way, the two of them would give others the feeling that they were standing on the same level. However, she didn't really care about this. The main reason she was so serious this morning was to see the Duke's attitude towards mixed bloods. It seemed that the Duke didn't discriminate against mixed bloods at all. She couldn't help but sigh in relief. As long as this fundamental problem didn't become an obstacle, other things that could be changed could always be solved. Panduola pondered as she cut the steak on the plate into small portions. The steak on the plate was very delicious, but it was a pity that from today onwards, he couldn't eat to his heart's content. After all, a girl should act like a girl. Panduola, you'll be in 5th grade in autumn, right? Claire Kate's sudden words made her hand that was holding the fork tremble slightly, and the sauce on the steak stained the corner of her mouth. She stuck out her tongue and licked the sauce off the corner of her mouth. She nodded and said, "Yes." "In that case," Claire said with a smile, "in another year, you will be in the 6th grade. I remember that starting from the 6th grade, the academy requires students to determine their career path. If they have a plan, they can apply for an internship in the first semester of the 6th grade. Would you like to work for me, Professor Claire?" Panduola's eyes widened in surprise. Claire's smile was very warm. "In fact, I'm preparing to start a club of mages. The club's business will be spread across many industries. If you're willing to join, you'll definitely find something you like." Panduola looked carefully and found that Claire was very likely serious. He couldn't help but frown. "Professor, I'm still working as a librarian in the academy." Claire smiled. "Isn't there Miss Bella as a librarian? Don't tell me you want to continue working as a librarian in the academy after graduation?" Panduola. Claire was shocked. "No way." Panduola smiled helplessly. "In fact, that's what I'm planning to do. Also, working in the academy is something that every student wants to do. The academy doesn't reject having a librarian." Claire shook her head. "Staying in the academy to develop your career does have its advantages, but that's for mediocre people. With your ability, the academy will only limit your development." Panduola still shook his head. "I still want to stay in the academy." Claire frowned and thought for a moment. He probed, "You don't want to leave Miss Bella?" Panduola nodded slightly. Claire said, "I think Miss Bella wouldn't want to delay your future because of her. Also, even if you leave the academy, you can go back to see her at any time." "It's not like that." Panduola gritted his teeth and said, "Actually, I want to apply to the academy this year to give my mother a chance to interview for a magical beast professor position." Claire turned to look at Hephaestus and immediately understood. For Hephaestus Doragon, there was no safer and more stable place than the Shang Malian Academy. If she could successfully apply for a position as a professor in the Shang Malian Academy, she would have a place of refuge. If Panduola stayed as a librarian, he could always be with his 2 family members. She had just reunited with her mother, so she definitely wouldn't be able to stay for long. At this point, Claire realized that Hephaestus and Yvette had stopped talking. Hephaestus had just proudly praised her daughter, but now she was blushing. Claire thought for a moment and said, "There's no rush now. You still have a year to think about it. Maybe you'll change your mind then? Well, it's fine even if it's a few more years. As long as my community doesn't collapse, there'll always be a place for you." In the face of such a warm invitation, Panduola couldn't reject it directly, so he could only nod with a smile. Seeing that the conversation was about to end, Dake took the opportunity and said, "Aunt Claire, are you really going to set up a Magister Society?" "Of course." Claire blinked. "When have I ever lied?" Dake could only say, "But if you set up a Magister Society, won't your Claire's travels around the world be followed up?" Claire was stunned, but then she smiled and said, "Who told you that I can't travel and explore after setting up a Magister Society? I'm going to include this part of my business." Dake shook his head and said, "A company with too many businesses will have a much harder time surviving. It's better to focus on a single business first, and then slowly expand. In the end, your Magister Society still doesn't have anything, right?" Claire crossed her arms and said confidently, "Yes, it's still in the initial stage." Dake smirked and said, "Then do you have other members? You can't be the only one, right?" Claire narrowed her eyes and revealed a dangerous aura. "Why do I feel like you're provoking me?" "No, no, no." Dake quickly waved his hands. "How would I dare?" "You don't dare, not you don't want to?" Claire suddenly said sternly. However, before Dake could argue, she laughed to herself. "It's just an idea. I don't really want to participate in politics, and I don't want to be a freeloader in your family. In the end, after thinking about it, I'm only left with the path of entrepreneurship. Why, do you have any good candidates to recommend to me?" Dake glanced at Panduola and pointed at himself. "Look, what do you think of me?" "You?" Claire asked suspiciously. "You have a lot of ideas. But if your studies are delayed because of this, I'm afraid Yalvet will skin me alive." Yvette glared at her and said, "Do I look like such a fierce person? At most, I'll pull out a few of your nails." Hiss, on the other side of the table, a few magic elves who were listening suddenly shivered and subconsciously touched their claws. Dake shrugged and said, "Actually, I'm thinking about how to start a chamber of commerce, and I already have a business plan. How about it? Won't you consider asking me to be the president?" Claire frowned slightly and said, "You really have a plan?" "Of course," Dake said seriously. "I originally planned to entrust a head maid to start the Chamber of Commerce on my behalf. But since you want to start a Magister's Guild, I won't do anything unnecessary. I'll be the president." Claire clapped her hands and said, "I understand, you want me to work for you for free." Dake smiled awkwardly. "How can that be? Who are we? Besides, what's mine is yours." Claire's lips curled up and she finally smiled. "Unfortunately, you just turned 13 this year. According to the current law, you have to be 16 years old to register for the guild. How about this, before you become an adult, I'll reluctantly be the acting president. After 3 years, if the law hasn't changed, I'll return the position of president to you. Now, let's talk about your business plan." Dake obviously knew that he wasn't old enough. The reason why he said that was just to take the initiative. So next, he briefly explained the concept of the dual disc. Easter egg model, card, dual disc, charging card, all linked together. Dake finally concluded, the biggest feature of this project is that it's universal. Even people who lack magic can use it to experience the fun of dueling. If it can be promoted smoothly, I don't need to say more about the profits, right? After listening, not only Claire, but even the others couldn't help but fall into deep thought. If it wasn't for the popularity of the model Easter egg, they might not have seen the prospects of a universal duel, because of their lack of knowledge and other reasons. But now that the model Easter egg was popular, it was easy for people to calculate the future. Not to mention, the essence of the duel card was in fact a derivative of the model Easter egg. In other words, it was a sure way to make money. If this project was the first project of Claire's Mage Society, it would definitely give the society, which currently had nothing, a very high starting point. And if they could use this as a foundation to accumulate their first fortune, then no matter what the society wanted to do, they would have enough details. The research of magic engineering was a costly matter to begin with. Dake just looked at Claire's expression and knew that she couldn't refuse. So he continued, "About this idea, I've already written a detailed plan. Also, I've already reached a distribution agreement with Brown of the Eugenie Chamber of Commerce. Of course, I'll return the favor. After the meal, I'll bring the plan to you." Claire couldn't help but sigh and say, "I always feel like my idea of starting a mage society is falling into your trap. This is called coincidental." Dake shook his head and said, "And isn't it good to fall into my trap?" Claire said dotingly, Okay. Dake couldn't help but raise his nose. Claire asked, "Can I ask what the purpose of this plan is?" "To make money," Dake said straightforwardly. Although the Duke's residence was very rich, it wasn't inexhaustible. But the research of magic technology was a bottomless pit. Moreover, he didn't feel bad about spending the money he earned. "I'm talking about other things." Claire rolled her eyes. Dake could only say, to let the whole world laugh at the duel. When breakfast was over, the magic elves left the dining hall under the guidance of the maids. Then, Arvette went to work while Claire stayed behind. Her idea of starting a mage society wasn't a joke. Otherwise, she wouldn't have tried so hard to recruit Panduola. In this era where the people were becoming more and more independent, capitalism had begun to sprout. It was because Claire noticed this that she wanted to get involved in capital and support Yvette outside of the military and politics. And the reason why she wanted the Mage Society to be the main focus was because magic technology was the future. As for who would be the president of the Mage Society, it wasn't the main point. After a while, Dake took out the proposal he had prepared and handed it to Claire. Then he felt his body relax, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. Although he was very interested in the proposal, a series of troublesome matters would definitely follow if he really started to set up the Chamber of Commerce. It was because he foresaw this that he prepared to let the head maid, Libra, do it. Now that he handed it to Claire, he naturally felt more at ease. After that, he only needed to communicate with the academy. Rather than doing it himself, Dake was more willing to be a hands-off shopkeeper and earn money by lying down. Panduola, Hephaestus, and even Aurora, who didn't feel like participating in the whole process, were all attracted by the proposal and gathered around Claire. Looking at their attitudes, even if they didn't want to join the Mage Society now, they most likely wouldn't be able to escape in the future. If that's the case, then after a few years, I'll change the name of Claire Archmage Society to Dark Archmage Society, and they'll be my people. Dake laughed in his heart and then quietly slipped out of the cafeteria. After the three tutors rushed through the night, the magic elves' test papers were all marked. As a parent, he naturally had to be present and let the magic elves feel the weight of their parents' expectations so that they could carry the burden forward. 8:30 in the morning. Apart from Camilla, the three tutors were all present. The atmosphere in the classroom was extra serious. Dake pushed open the door and entered, causing the pressure on the magic elves to increase. 2 in 1 4,000 plus. 200,000 words away from the small goal. It's time to reveal my true strength. See you tomorrow night at 12. Chapter 5:15. Even Dake himself hadn't received such treatment in his past classes. 3 teachers and a parent were distributing the test papers on the podium, and they were distributing the test papers from the lowest score. In the past, when they were particular about reducing burden and advocated not announcing the results, this kind of behavior was simply going against the trend. However, magic guide elves were different from real human children. Their tolerance was far stronger than human children. In a day of 24 hours, under normal circumstances, they would be full of energy after 2 hours of sleep. Even if they didn't sleep for 24 hours, they would still be able to maintain their basic state. Of course, only maintaining the most basic state wasn't suitable for learning. When Dake walked past the podium, he slightly nodded toward the magic guide elves, then sat down at the corner and began to watch. And the magic guide elves were secretly looking at him. There were those who were full of confidence like Fairy Ibu, and there were also those who were guilty and timid like little Snorlax. But little Snorlax was after all just born, so even if its results weren't good, it was still pardonable. Remember in 1 second. https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. Just when Dake was thinking like this, Madam Cook, as the head of the tutors, opened her mouth and said, "It has been more than a month since I started teaching you. Although you aren't human, you are more intelligent than some of the human children I taught in the past, and most of the students are very hardworking. I always believe that hard work pays off. Hardworking people will always get what they want." The preamble ends here, and now I will announce the results, starting from the last place. As soon as she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the classroom instantly stagnated. The magic guide elves didn't expect that the highlight would come so early and so suddenly. Compared to the first place, they obviously cared more about who the last place was. After all, it was the most shameful, and also the one who needed the most sympathy. Even before Madam Cook announced the results, most of the magic guide elves had already focused their attention on little Snorlax and Trash Slime. Little Snorlax was just born, and it was gluttonous and sleepy, so its results were pardonable. Trash Slime's intelligence level wasn't high. Even if it was improved with the help of Madam Plant, it was still at the bottom. Without a doubt, the two of them were the strongest contenders for the last place. Little Snorlax was still licking its fingers with a silly and cute face under everyone's gaze, while Trash Slime was subconsciously shrinking towards the direction of the polymorph monster. Who will be the last one? When Ms. Cook pulled out the first paper, everyone's eyes shifted to the podium. It was as if an award had just been unveiled. Ms. Cook glanced at the sight in her hand. Then, with a stern look, she knocked on the silly little Snorlax and said, "Now, the result will be revealed. The last one, little Snorlax, score, 0 points. 0 points? XN. The classroom was suddenly filled with a lot of noise. Although the fact that little Snorlax won the last place was within expectations, perhaps no one would have thought that it didn't get a single point. But why was it able to eat so happily and sleep so soundly when it didn't get a single point? Endless doubt appeared in the eyes of the magic guide fairies. Even Doc couldn't help but be stunned. This little Snorlax didn't have the thick fat, characteristic car busy? Little Snorlax was biting its finger. It was puzzled by the strange gazes of its family members. Cough. Dake couldn't help but ask, "If I remember correctly, there are 4 subjects in this exam, and each subject is worth 100 points, right?" "Yes." Ms. Cook said seriously, "These 4 subjects are reading and writing, arithmetic, common sense, and history." Which is literature, mathematics, nature, and history. Dake nodded. This was indeed in line with his teaching requirements. But since it was such a configuration, how could it get a 0? Could it be a blank paper? In his impression, except for a person called Nobita, there should be very few people who could master this special skill, right? "Let me have a look at the test paper," Dake said to Ms. Cook. Ms. Plant, who was standing at the side, took the paper and handed it to him. Dake took the paper and flipped through it slightly. Then, his face gradually turned gloomy. Little Snorlax's learning progress was faster than he expected. At least, it could write its own name in a decent way. Moreover, it could also use some phonetic symbols to replace the words that it couldn't write. But it was precisely because of this that the problem was big. Because in this case, it couldn't be illiterate as the reason why it got a 0. Especially in the arithmetic paper, there were such things as 13 plus 14 equals. But its answer was 1,314. 13 plus 14 is equal to 1,314? Dake continued to read and found that in the question and answer at the back, in addition to some random scribbles, there were also crooked pictures of food. This is the problem of the attitude. He closed the paper and said to the audience, "Little Snorlax, come up and take the paper." Ka. Little Snorlax snorted. It lay down on the chair and walked to Dake happily. Dake handed the paper to it and said decisively, "From today onwards, your food will be halved." Little Snorlax, Ka. Its mouth was wide open, and its whole body was stuck. But Dake Dimming never lied. I will let the teachers grade your learning attitude after the lesson, and then decide the food standard for the next day according to the score. With 5 points as the standard, 10 kilograms of food will be added for every extra point, and 10 kilograms of food will be deducted for every less point. The maximum score is 12 points. Do you have any objections? Little Snorlax quickly raised its hands and said loudly, "Ka, ka, ka. Dake, come. It's good that you don't have any objections, you can go first." Therefore, little Snorlax hugged the paper and turned into a statue. Dake's punishment made the atmosphere more and more tense. Ms. Cook took out the second paper and said, "The second from the bottom, which is the 19th place." Speaking until here, she glanced at the audience and said sternly, "Single Scabbard, come up and take the paper." Ka. The single scabbard that was leaning on the chair suddenly let out a broken sound, as if the scabbard was suddenly broken. And the garbage slime that was sitting at the same table as the monster suddenly became spirited, and its soft body straightened up. Perhaps no one would have thought that the garbage slime was not the second from the bottom. The single scabbard swayed and floated to the podium. It turned the ribbon into a palm and held the paper, and then carefully peeped at its master's reaction. However, Dake didn't say much like he did to Snorlax, and only looked at it with a dull gaze. Therefore, its flight path became even more messy. The 18th place. Ms. Cook took out the third paper and looked at the audience. The expression of the magic elves became tense. Little Snorlax's 0 points had broken through the lower limit, and the single scabbard's second from the bottom made people wake up. No one wanted to be the third person to be surpassed by the garbage slime. However, the gap between those who worked hard and those who slacked off had been gradually widened when they did that. The 18th place, Cyanide Baby Dragon. The baby dragon, who was holding its head, walked up to the podium with its head lowered. Its cheeks were red, and even its scales were dyed red. It picked up the paper and hurriedly ran away. As the incarnation of pride, the cyanide baby dragon's arrogance was hidden deep in its heart. On the surface, it was obedient, but it was just a pure attribute that was given to it by the baby dragon. It didn't study seriously. Even after little Snorlax was born, it formed a gluttonous and sleepy bottom 2 team with it. Even in this stage test, it felt that it was good as long as it wasn't at the bottom. However, this laziness made it become the bottom 3. The magic elves' piercing gazes made its whole body ache. Its thick dragon scales and extremely high 3 measurements were unable to stop the penetrating gazes. The arrogance hidden deep in its heart was finally stimulated. It secretly swore in its heart that it must listen to the class seriously. Dake observed the single scabbard and the cyanide baby dragon, nodding, "No shame, and you can make progress. No shame and be brave." After the bottom 3, it was the 17th place. When Madam Cook took out the 4th paper, a satisfied smile appeared on her face. Although the result of the 17th place wasn't ideal, compared to the student's own ability, this was already a great improvement. She raised her head and said to the garbage slime, "The 17th place, slime, polymorph, come up and help it take the paper." Busy. The polymorph suddenly jumped 3 feet high. It was even happier than getting the first place. Although the result of the 17th place wasn't much, the garbage slime's previous level was one of a kind. Now, not only did it make great progress, it also got rid of the fate of being at the bottom. Naturally, it was worth celebrating. Pa. Dake suddenly applauded. Well done. Using his applause as an opportunity, the magic elves who were surprised by the garbage slime's result also applauded. Suddenly, the applause was like thunder, resounding in the classroom. The garbage slime couldn't help but stand up, the tentacles that squeezed out from its body clenched into small fists. It was so happy to have succeeded in learning. It had to continue to work hard. After the applause subsided, Ms. Cook began to distribute the next paper. After that, the 16th place, Moon Lady. Ms. Cook looked at the moon god's soul and reminded her again, "Moon Lady, come up and take the paper." The moon god's soul, whose body was stiff like a rusty screw, walked up to the podium with her hands and feet. Even if she didn't care about the so-called learning, she couldn't accept that she, who would become a god sooner or later, actually ended up in the 16th place in a class with only 20 students. 16th place, only one place higher than the garbage slime. The path from the seat to the podium was like a path of thorns. Every step she took pierced the soles of her feet, dripping with blood. This was simply humiliating. As expected, this method of announcing the results is extremely destructive to people with strong self-esteem. Let's see if you can still slack off now. Dake narrowed his eyes and observed the moon god's soul's stiff expression, the little person in his heart jumping like a little apple. Magic elves and human children had temperaments that were no different. Not all magic elves liked to learn. As a parent, he had to guide them on the relatively correct path. There was nothing wrong with learning. After a few minutes, there were finally only 3 papers left on the podium. The magic elves couldn't help but perk up their ears. Although they paid the most attention to who was in the last place, they were also quite interested in who was in the first place. Dake looked at the last 3 magic elves and couldn't help but reveal a satisfied smile. So far, the results of the other 17 magic elves had been announced. Among them, the 15th to the 11th place were Phoenix Girl, Hawkman Wrestling, Vampire's Daughter, Chocho Sea Lion, Dream Demon. The 10th to the 6th place were Meow Meow, Kettle Kettle, Variety Monster, Magician Secretary, Big Milk Can. The 5th place was Ivan. The 4th place was Lion Beast. The remaining 3 magic elves were Diru Beast, Fairy Ivan, and Little Fiend Beast. From this it could be seen. The results of Phoenix Girl and Vampire's Daughter were still not ideal. Ever since the Hawkman Wrestling shifted its focus to physical training and martial arts training, its results had been steadily declining. And Dream Demon's results had steadily improved after mastering the drug learning method. As for Chocho Sea Lion's ranking falling. In fact, the results of the top 10 places weren't very different. Overall, there was a huge improvement. In comparison, Meow Meow's results had indeed declined. This had a lot to do with it shifting part of its energy to the support of armament refinement. In addition, the Magician Secretary's results were unexpectedly not outstanding. It had already slipped from the first echelon to the second echelon. It could be seen that after everyone worked hard to memorize the necessary basic knowledge, its advantage gradually disappeared. On the other hand, Hua, Changeable Monster, and Big Milk can maintain stable results. In addition, the Lion Beast had caught up and surpassed Ibu-chan. This had a lot to do with its tenacious character. Ivan, who had been ranked 3rd in the final exam, was now very disappointed. As for the remaining 3 magic elves, they were the Diru Beast, who had been ranked 1st and 2nd in the final exam, and Little Fiend Beast, who had been ranked 6th at that time. It seemed that after Little Fiend Beast's only proud result had been surpassed, it had also honestly worked hard. However, it was still unclear who would be ranked 1st in the final exam. Dake looked expectantly at the podium. Ms. Cook separated the last 3 test papers, then took out 3 medals with big red flowers hanging on them and slightly showed them to the audience. These 3 medals were gold, silver, and bronze respectively. They were additional rewards for this stage of the exam. For this kind of exam, a substantial medal that could be collected was actually very important. After seeing the medal, the winner would want to continue winning. After seeing the medal, the loser would also want to have one. Diru Beast, Fairy Ivan, and Little Fiend Beast, come to the podium. Ms. Cook faintly smiled and prepared to hold a small award ceremony. This way, the magic elves would have a deeper impression of it. The 3 magic elves looked in the direction of Dake at the same time, then walked to the podium. The Diru Beast was as calm as before, but its eyes revealed arrogance. Fairy Ivan held its head high, but the tip of its ribbon antenna was slightly trembling, showing its nervousness. Little Fiend Beast flew over in the air with a proud expression. Clearly, for Little Fiend Beast, getting into the top 3 was a victory. Fairy Ivan, on the other hand, was aiming for 1st place, so it was quite nervous. But no matter what, it was time to enjoy the harvest. The other magic elves looked at them enviously, and most of them were motivated to work harder. After waiting for the 3 magic elves to come to the podium, Ms. Cook thought for a bit, then picked up the test papers on the table and let them come to the podium. Then, she gave the test papers and the trophy to the other two professors, and began the award ceremony. Ms. Plant looked at the names on the test papers, and revealed a trace of a smile. Then, she picked up the bronze medal and walked over. The magic elves looked at her nervously. In a situation where they were guaranteed to get into the top 3, no one wanted this bronze medal. But Ms. Plant didn't stop, and finally walked in front of Little Fiend Beast. Although Little Fiend Beast was a bit disappointed, having a medal was better than not having one, right? Thus, it wrapped its wings around the medal, and then hung it on the tip of its wings, holding it high. Very good. Ms. Plant smiled. Congratulations to Little Fiend Beast for getting 3rd place in this exam. I hope you can continue to work hard. Of course. Little Fiend Beast smiled proudly. Do you see this medal? This is the proof of the strong. As for me, the little devil beast, I only had to put in a bit of effort to obtain it. The originally sparse applause suddenly stopped. The magic elves looked suspiciously at Little Fiend Beast, who was very proud of himself, and didn't say anything. But Little Fiend Beast wasn't affected by the outside world at all, and continued to talk non-stop. So, what does this mean? It means that everyone here is benevolent. Of course, I won't say that out loud. Everyone, you must keep an eye on my butt and work hard, cough. Now, let's invite Teacher Cyrus to present the medal to the 2nd place. Ms. Cook hurriedly covered it with her voice. Sage Cyrus also stood up with the silver medal and the test papers. He looked at Little Fiend Beast with interest, and Little Fiend Beast felt a chill all over, and subconsciously stopped talking. Cyrus smiled faintly and walked toward them. The other magic elves' attention was finally successfully diverted. The ownership of the 2nd medal actually meant that the 1st place would be missed, so all the magic elves focused their attention. Cyrus looked back and forth between Fairy Ibu and the Dilu Beast, and discovered that in the depths of these 2 4-star magic elves' eyes, there was a trace of nervousness and expectation. Looks like you all want to get 1st place. Cyrus walked in front of Fairy Ibu, and deliberately stopped. He waited until Fairy Ibu's ribbon antennae violently trembled, and then he took another step forward. Then he put the silver medal on the Dilu Beast's neck, and loudly announced, 2nd place, Dilu Beast. Pa. Thunderous applause instantly erupted from the audience. Although the Dilu Beast had fallen from 1st place last time to 2nd place this time, its score was still far in the lead. It could only be said that Fairy Ibu had done better. Me. Therefore, when the results were confirmed, Fairy Ibu suddenly jumped up in joy. She glanced at the expressionless Dilu Beast, and the 2 ribbons formed a heart shape in the air. Then, without waiting for Ms. Cook to come forward to present the gold medal reward, it turned around and knocked the little monster away. It jumped off the podium and sprinted like a fierce tiger pouncing on its prey, crashing into Dark's arms. Dake promptly opened his arms and hugged her. Fairy Ibu laid her meaty cushion on his shoulder, and excitedly rubbed her soft face against his. Dake helplessly let her do as she pleased. Fairy Ibu's mood was transmitted to his soul through the ribbon on his hand, making him feel excited and happy. His sleepless efforts had finally paid off. Fairy Ibu finally surpassed the Dilu Beast by just a few points, obtaining 1st place in this stage of the test. The magic elves' applause changed at this moment. The Dilu Beast turned its head, and its eyes firmly stared at Fairy Ibu's face, and suddenly narrowed. Meow. When the applause stopped, Ms. Cook took the test paper and the gold medal and walked to Dake's side. Dake exchanged glances with her for a while, and then took the gold medal from her hand, and put it on Fairy Ibu's neck from back to front. Fairy Ibu felt the touch of the ribbon, and finally stopped rubbing, and raised her head a little. Dake looked at Fairy Ibu, whose eyes were red and moist, and pressed the gold medal on her chest, saying, "Congratulations, you've successfully obtained 1st place." Meow. Fairy Ibu opened her arms, and fiercely hugged Dake's face. At this point, the announcement of the results was over. The 3 magic elves that had obtained the medal and a large amount of red flowers were ordered to return to their seats. Dake walked up to the podium, and gave a final summary of this test. I know that you all have different views on learning, and I won't force you to learn too profound knowledge, but learning the basics is very necessary. Especially the Vampire's Daughter and the Phoenix Girl, if you want to pass the Shang Malian Academy's entrance test, then please work hard in the following time. Otherwise, I can only give up on this idea." The vampire's daughter and the phoenix girl's faces suddenly froze. Dake glanced at them, and didn't say anything else. He continued, "The Shangmalian Academy's entrance test is usually half a month before the start of the school term, so you only have a month left. That's all. Finally, congratulations to Fairy Ibu, the Diru Beast, and the Little Devil for obtaining first place, second place, and third place respectively. In the middle of next month, before the Shangmalian Academy's entrance test, there will be a second test. I hope that more magic elves will be able to obtain excellent results in the second test. Next, I'll return the classroom to Teacher Cook." After saying this, Dake moved a little, and waited until Madam Cook started to speak, and then he left the classroom. Through this test, he had a more detailed understanding of the magic elves' learning progress and mental state. And the magic elves also had a clearer understanding of their own level. They might be able to find their own goals, and thus obtain the motivation to move forward. Dake very much hoped that in the second test next month, the magic elves would be able to make great progress. Of course, he had to set an example, and start working hard. After resting for 2 days, I almost lost my train of thought. Dake took out the materials for Mathematics 2 again, and began to fill in the content according to the framework he had already drawn up. After about a quarter of an hour, he finally recovered his state, and the speed at which he wrote gradually quickened. A day quickly passed, and dusk arrived. Dake let out a sigh of relief after being reminded by Olga, and temporarily put down the pen in his hand. With the framework in place, filling in the content was relatively simple. The content for Mathematics 2 was only at the junior high level, and the slightly more difficult content was related to Olympiad math. He originally planned to divide the junior high math content into 2 volumes, which would be compiled into Mathematics 2 and Mathematics 3, and then the senior high math content would be compiled into Mathematics 11 and Mathematics 11, and finally some advanced math content would be compiled into Mathematics 11. This way, it would be in line with the 6-year curriculum of the Shangmalian Academy. But after being reminded by Claire this morning, he realized that the 6th grade curriculum of the Shangmalian Academy mainly focused on practical teaching, and wasn't suitable for advanced math content that was too deep. Therefore, he made adjustments. He planned to compile 80% of the junior high math content in Mathematics 2, 20% of the junior high math content and 60% of the senior high math content in Mathematics 3, and the remaining 40% of the senior high math content and some Olympiad math content in Mathematics 11. After that, he would divide the advanced math content into 2 volumes, which would be compiled into Mathematics 2 and Mathematics 11, and make Mathematics 11 and Mathematics 11 as electives. This way, students who didn't do well could continue to study Mathematics 3 and Mathematics 11 in the 5th and 6th grades. Students who had good grades and wanted to continue to study in depth could take Mathematics 3 and Mathematics 11 in the 5th and 6th grades respectively. That's reasonable. Dake patted his cheeks to get himself out of the ocean of math, and only then did he tidy up a little, and followed Olga to the dining hall. When he arrived, the magic elves were already prepared at their own table. The announcement of the results in the morning obviously affected some of the magic elves, and even during dinner time, there were still some magic elves holding notebooks in their hands. The young green-eyed dragon was also no longer like before, always grabbing the cutlery and staring at the door with Snorlax. The vampire daughter and phoenix girl seemed to have finally understood the importance of studying, and were still flipping through their books before dinner. When they encountered something they didn't understand, the Dilu beast who could speak human language became the best person to ask for advice. As for the little demon beast in 3rd place and the lion beast in 4th place, they were snatched away by the other magic elves. I hope it's not a 3-minute popularity. Dake nodded with satisfaction, and then he started to discuss the content related to the national duel with Claire. As Panduola and the others took their seats, dinner finally began. When Dake was busy writing Mathematics 2, Aurora shouldered the responsibility of being the host, and brought Panduola and Hephaestus to the back of the mountain to play. When they talked about it during dinner, the dining hall was filled with laughter. Halfway through, Arvet, who had finished her work, came over late, and the dining hall became more lively. After dinner, Yvette pulled Hephaestus and Panduola to the living room, and Aurora returned to the bedroom to continue her study. Dake didn't continue to write Mathematics 2, but he brought the half-finished Easter reward, transformation spell, and entered Claire's room. "Have a seat." Claire asked him to sit down, and a monkey poured tea for both of them. Claire said, "Show me your transformation spell." "Okay." Dake responded, and then he took out the transformation spell and handed it over. After Claire received the transformation spell, she carefully observed it for a moment and said, "This is one of the prizes you received at the Easter Duel Festival?" Dake nodded and smiled, "Yes, a half-finished magic card." "It's not just a half-finished product." Claire observed the transformation spell and was a little surprised. "Is this the work of Professor Ka-Zayer?" Dake said, "Yes." "No wonder." Claire couldn't help but sit up straight. Only Professor Ka-Zayer can modify the transformation spell to the point where it only needs to be written into the transformation spell. "It seems that I have nothing to teach you, so I'll teach you the method of writing the transformation spell." Dake nodded. This was his goal. Claire thought for a moment, took a piece of paper from the desk, wrote a few questions about the magic language, and pushed it over. "Let me see how far you've learned the magic language." Dake took the paper and looked at it carefully. Claire wrote down 5 questions ranging from easy to difficult. Dake only answered 2 of the questions before he had to put down his pen. This was because the last 3 questions were in a range that he hadn't touched at all. 2 questions. Claire glanced at the paper and looked at it carefully. 3 minutes later, she looked up and said, "You've mastered between the 2nd and 3rd grade? Who taught you the magic language?" Dake said, "Most of it was self-taught." "All right." Claire put away the paper and said, "The transformation spell doesn't require too much knowledge. Go back first today and come back tomorrow night." The next night, when Dake came to Claire's bedroom again, she had already sorted out the knowledge points needed to write the transformation spell. In other words, she didn't immediately teach him how to write the transformation spell. Instead, she started with further learning the magic language. From then on, Dake gave Claire all the time at night. After only 3 nights, he completely grasped the knowledge points needed to write the transformation spell. Then, Claire began to teach him the specific steps of writing the transformation spell. In the blink of an eye, it was July 21st, Saturday. Unknowingly, Panduola and Hephaestus had already spent 7 nights in the Duke's mansion. Although the people in the mansion didn't treat them as outsiders, they couldn't stay forever. As the effects of the Demon King execution ceremony gradually disappeared, the order of the imperial city gradually returned to normal. As for the Holy Church, because of the disappearance of the Demon King's corpse, they fell into another round of busyness. As a result, the pursuit of the escapees was greatly reduced. At this time, it was the best time to leave the imperial city. Therefore, after careful consideration, Panduola and Hephaestus decided to leave. Although life in the Duke's mansion was stable, it wasn't a long-term solution. Moreover, the imperial city was within the Holy Church's sphere of influence. Not only was it dangerous, but it could also easily bring unnecessary trouble to the Duke's mansion. There was still more than a month before school started. Panduola wanted to go to more places with his mother and see more beautiful sights. Therefore, the 2 of them told her about their decision to leave during breakfast. "Can't you stay for a few more days?" Yvette couldn't help but urge them to stay. These days, she and Hephaestus got along quite well. After going through the ordeal of being imprisoned, the lady transformed by the white dragon had obviously matured a lot. She was no longer as arrogant as she was when she was young. She also had some motherly qualities. After returning to the Duke's mansion every night, Yvette would talk to her about parenting. Although these 2 mothers, one only knew how to pamper her child and the other had no experience in taking care of children, they chatted logically and were quite agreeable. Yvette didn't have many friends who could talk about this topic, so she was a little reluctant to let Hephaestus leave. On the other side, Aurora was also quite reluctant to let Senior Panduola leave. Because Anna couldn't come to the Duke's mansion for the time being, she could only learn about armaments and magic-related knowledge by herself. If she encountered something she didn't understand, she couldn't ask anyone. Fortunately, Panduola's existence filled in this gap. These days, she spent most of her time with Panduola. It could be said that she learned a lot from this senior. There was no doubt that the two of them had built a friendship. On the other hand, Dake was busy writing Mathematics 2 and learning the transformation spell, so he didn't have much time to spend with her. When he suddenly heard that she was leaving the mansion, he realized that time had passed quickly. He didn't even bring her around the capital. Therefore, when Panduola and Hephaestus further expressed their intention to leave, he smiled and said, "Why don't we have a farewell party tonight and leave tomorrow?" With Yvette and Claire's agreement, Panduola and Hephaestus couldn't refuse and agreed to stay for another night. Dake continued, "Today is Saturday. I'll take you to the capital for a good walk." "I won't be going." Hephaestus shook her head slightly and smiled. "You young people can go and have fun together." Panduola playfully said, "What? Are you done with your work?" Dake couldn't help but look away. "It's the same if you do it tomorrow." Panduola agreed. Dake then said, "Since it's decided, there's no time to lose. Let's prepare and leave after dinner." Aurora, okay. A week had passed since the end of the Demon King's execution ceremony, and most of the outsiders had already left. The streets that had become abnormally lively due to the arrival of many outsiders now had a desolate feeling. Panduola and Aurora changed into outfits and followed Dake out of the Duke's mansion. Olga was already waiting outside. "Is it you today?" Dake walked over and smelled a familiar fragrance. Olga happily said, "Yes, young master. Katrina has something to do outside, so I'll accompany her today." "Sister Olga." Aurora walked over and greeted Olga. Olga nodded slightly and looked at Panduola. She smiled and said, "I've never formally introduced myself. I'm Olga, young master's personal maid. I'm very happy to be able to travel with you this time, Miss Doragon. Just call me Panduola." Panduola raised her hand and shook it, but a glimmer of light flashed in her eyes. After staying in the Duke's mansion for a few days, how could she not see Olga's status in the mansion? They were about the same age, and when they shook hands and looked at each other, although there was no hostility, there was a deeper meaning. When they let go of their hands, Dake had already pulled Aurora into the carriage. He poked his head out of the window and reminded them, "If you don't come now, we won't wait for you." "We'll be right there." Panduola replied and said to Olga, "Let's go." Then the two got into the carriage together. The Duke's carriage was spacious enough that it didn't feel crowded even when the four of them sat inside. On the small table in the middle of the carriage, there were small pieces of fruit. But this time, the fruit was beautifully arranged, and many of them were carved into the shape of small animals. So sweet." Dake ate a piece of fruit and praised. This was obviously Olga's work, so there was no harm in praising it. As expected, Olga smiled sweetly. Panduola blinked and said, "The inside of the carriage could be so comfortable. By the way, where are we going today?" Dake smiled and said, "Wherever you want to go." Panduola said, "Then, let's go to the places you usually go." Dake's hand holding the fork paused for a moment, and he couldn't help but turn to look at Aurora. Aurora's face turned red, and she turned her head away in embarrassment. Dake said, "Then let's go to Blue Jade Street to look at the jade, then go to the dessert shop to see if there are any new products, then walk around Pet Street, and finally go to Star Building for lunch. In the afternoon, let's go to Soul and Dream. Jade Shop, Dessert Shop, and Pet Shop? That does sound like the places you would go." Panduola covered her mouth and chuckled. "But what are Star Building and Soul and Dream?" Dake explained, "Star Building and Soul and Dream are entertainment places that nobles often go to. However, the former is a gathering place for most young people, while the latter is more upscale and more popular among middle-aged people. Last time, I saw a magic duel exhibition match at Soul and Dream. The guest contestant was a duelist named Butterfly Girl. I don't know if you've heard of her before?" "Butterfly Girl?" Panduola thought carefully for a moment and said, "I have some impression of her. In the past, I seem to have seen her in newspapers or magazines. She was a rather famous duelist. Dake. Panduola asked, "Why, are you not satisfied with her?" Dake sighed slightly. "I always felt that she was flashy but not practical." Panduola smiled slightly. "Sometimes, being flashy is also a duel strategy. To understand a duelist, you can't just analyze 1 or 2 matches. Especially when it was an exhibition match. 5 in 1 10,000 plus. 124 plus / 233. The next chapter isn't finished yet, asterisk. Chapter 5:16. Facing the summer breeze, the carriage sped along. Dake and his group first went to Blue Jade Street, strolled around jade shops, and played stone gambling for a while. Then, they went to the sweet dessert shop, and sat down to eat some snacks. After that, they went around the Star Cluster building, strolled around the Pet Street, and returned to the Star Cluster building. Dake was much more relaxed when he came to the Star Cluster building again. Even when Panduola asked about the statue on the roof, he could still talk about it without any awkwardness. "If it was me, it wouldn't be a statue that was cut in half." As Senior Sister Pandora spoke, she walked up the Star Cluster building with great interest. Perhaps because Dake's attitude was too amiable last time, the manager of the Star Cluster building actually mustered up the courage to come forward. However, Dake casually chatted with him and sent him away. As for the nobles who were gathered in the Star Cluster building to kill time today, they didn't scatter like rabbits that had seen a wolf like the last time. He was afraid that news of Dark Diamond's last visit to the Star Cluster building had already spread. These people probably already knew that he had changed from a hedonistic son who would beat people up and tear down their houses to a kind person who would turn hostility into chess. Marquis Middleton's youngest son, Joshua, had suffered a crushing defeat in a game of magic chess against him. This matter had probably become a joke in many people's leisure time. Website: https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. Of course, the Magus duel between him and Angus Jeffrey was more widely spread. After all, that was a better reflection of a person's strength. Angus Jeffrey's defeat was even more dramatic. Who would have thought that a 4th-year student would lose to a 1st-year student in an official Magus duel? Angus Jeffrey might have already become a laughingstock in some circles. Let's not talk about it. Dake brought Panduola, Aurora, and Olga up from the 1st floor of the Star Cluster building to the 6th floor. Unfortunately, he didn't meet Joshua this time. The group of people gathered on the 6th floor didn't have much interaction with him. Thus, he only ate lunch on the 6th floor of the Star Cluster building before leaving. According to the plan, we can go to the Eugenie Trade Circle first, and then go to the Haunting Soul Club. Dake pondered for a moment before instructing the Dragon Tamer guards to take a detour to Eugenie's Trading Circle. In this business circle full of rustic atmosphere, there was a noise and liveliness that the aristocratic city did not have. There were bards from afar, adventurers from all over the place, travelers who were dying in the capital, and residents who had taken root here. Countless people formed a huge flood. After Dake and the others got off at the intersection, they walked all the way to the Horseshoe Tavern. Along the way, there were some small incidents that made him smile even more. Walking together with the person you like, even if the road is boring, you can walk forever. What's more, the surrounding scenery was so bustling that it made people linger. When the owner of the Horseshoe Tavern saw the arrival of Dake and the others, he hurriedly came forward to greet them. However, Dake and the others only sat for a short while before getting back into the carriage. The sound of people galloping gradually faded away, and the surrounding environment returned to silence. Dake, Panduola, and Aurora chatted in the carriage about what they saw today and what they heard yesterday. From time to time, laughter would float out of the window and into the clouds. Not long after, the Duke's carriage drove into the lush garden, which was known as the Royal Courtyard. The lush garden was very green, and the lawn and flower beds could be seen everywhere, filling the air with the fragrance of flowers. Cute birds were singing in the trees, and groups of butterflies were dancing in the flower beds. The carriage gradually slowed down and slowly drove into the Haunting Soul Club in the lush garden. "Is this the high-class club you were talking about?" Panduola poked her head out of the carriage window and looked up at the old castle that was gradually coming into view. There was a faint curiosity in her heart. Dake nodded and said, "A place that requires a membership card to enter. But other than the interesting performances, everything else is just as so." Panduola could not help but roll her eyes. For the son of the Duke, how could it not be so? In her opinion, even the star cluster building that she had walked past today was luxurious enough. The prices of those luxury goods often surprised her. She had been living in the academy ever since she left the Forest of Exile, and she had only left early during the holidays to exchange some credits for holy coins at Traveller Street. As the process of exchanging credits for holy coins was irreversible, she did not dare to be too extravagant. Although she had reunited with her mother, it was a pity that Hephaestus was even poorer than her. Of course, for a dragon species that was full of treasures, it was too easy to earn money. Seeing the Duke's carriage stop in the Guildhall's garden, a female attendant quickly came to greet them. It was Miss Jessica, who had been in charge of entertaining Dake and the others last time. "Welcome, young Master Dimming. I am Jessica, and I will serve you wholeheartedly." Jessica had chestnut shoulder-length curly hair. Her facial features were exquisite, and her skin was fair. Her exquisite makeup gave her a faint intellectual beauty. She wore a more neutral outfit, and only the collar was slightly open, revealing an attractive abyss. Dake nodded at her and got down from the carriage after Olga. He then extended his hand and helped Aurora and Panduola down from the carriage. Jessica observed the two ladies who had come with the young master of the Dimming family, and her gaze lingered on Panduola for a while. Obviously, she had figured out who the main guests were this time. After 3 in the afternoon, the number of people in Haunted by Dreams gradually increased. The carriages drove into the garden, and the men and women who walked out of the carriages were either rich or respectable. Every one of them exuded a luxurious aura. Panduola walked beside Dake and blended in perfectly with the environment. Halfway through, she hooked her arm around Dake's. Aurora, who was walking on the other side of Dake, looked more and more like their younger sister. Aurora clenched her fingers and felt a little uneasy. Olga, on the other hand, was a little slower. She walked behind them and squinted her eyes at the backs of the two ladies. As Angus Jeffrey's jokes gradually spread, Dake Diming's reputation had changed slightly. Along the way, there were many nobles who took the initiative to greet them, so much so that it was annoying. Dake seemed to be calmly dealing with those people, but he could not help but quicken his pace. Other than that, the goods and services in Haunted by Dreams were very attractive. Even Panduola could not help but take a fancy to a piece of jewelry. It was a silver necklace with a cat pendant, and it was worth a lot. However, Dake's VIP membership card was the highest level. Not only did it not have any restrictions, but it also had a free quota of 1 million holy coins per month. It was more than enough to buy a necklace. Of course, he would not favor one over the other. He also chose one for Aurora and Olga. It was not until 5 in the afternoon that the 4 of them arrived at the center of Haunted by Dreams. Dake was already familiar with the circular corridor built around the arena. He led the way to the inside of the corridor and asked, "What's the performance tonight?" Jessica revealed a professional smile and said, "It's 5 now. There should be a shield-bashing performance in the arena, followed by a swordsmanship performance, a piano performance, and a beast-tamer performance." A shield-bashing performance and a beast-tamer performance? Dake was curious. Jessica explained, a shield-bashing performance, simply put, is a clash between 2 warriors with shields. The winner will be the one who rushes the other out of the predetermined range. What about the beast-tamer performance? Dake asked. Jessica smiled and said, it should be considered a high-level performance of the circus. Now that magicians are flourishing, beast-tamers have already retired from the stage of history. It's not easy to find a real beast-tamer. I see. Dake nodded slightly and had some understanding of these 2 performances. The shield-bashing performance was similar to sumo wrestling, but the warriors in the performance had to hold a heavy shield and gather all their strength to clash. It required a lot of strength and endurance from the warriors on both sides. Every time they collided, the sound of explosions would set off a wave of excitement among the audience. If this was a competition, it should be an extremely hot-blooded competition. As for the beast tamer performance, it would probably allow the audience to experience the aura of a real beast, different from that of a magic fairy. But halfway through, Dake suddenly paused and asked doubtfully, "Are you sure it's time for the shield-bashing performance?" Jessica couldn't help but look at the edge of the corridor. There were indeed many guests gathered at the edge of the corridor, but the sound of shields clashing that should have been there didn't sound. If one listened carefully, what entered their ears was the sound of human voices and bird cries. Could it be that the beast tamer went on stage early? Jessica hesitated and said calmly, "Perhaps the order of the performance has been adjusted. This is not rare in the arena. Anyway, we'll know when we go and take a look." Doc's interest was piqued when he sensed the mana fluctuations coming from the arena. He quickened his pace to the edge of the corridor and looked down while holding the railing. He saw that there were two magisters dueling in the arena. A magister's duel? Pandora leaned close to him and looked down. She couldn't help but raise the corners of her mouth. Although it had been a pleasant day, the magister's duel was still more attractive to her. "Is this also an exhibition match?" "I don't think so." Dake pointed at one of the duelists and said, "Haunted by Dreams can't afford such a duelist." "Well, let me think." Panduola frowned slightly and thought for a moment. "The one down there is the president of the Aristocratic History Research Society, right?" "I've seen him before." Dake said, "Yes, it's Angus Jeffrey. I wonder why he's dueling. Was it because he got PTSD last time?" Panduola. Dake shook his head. "Nothing. I mean, maybe he's obsessed with duels?" Panduola couldn't help but smile. "I don't think so." The two then focused their attention on the arena below. Although Angus Jeffrey's frigid winter earth had been successfully dispelled, the temperature in the arena had dropped and it would be difficult to recover in a short period of time. His opponent was dressed in a suit and had ample space in his movements. But this was just a facade. Even if the duelists trained by Haunted by Dreams were lacking in strength, they had to look good and not lose their composure at any time. This was the professional training of an actor. But from above, the duelist's face, which was covered by the brim of his hat, was distorted. In this cold environment, he was sweating all over and his eyes were narrowed. It was obvious that something was wrong. On the other hand, Angus Jeffrey was looking down on him with arrogance and indifference, as if he was looking down on an ant. Although he probably thought so in the past, he would never show it in front of the public like now. But at this moment, Angus Jeffrey did not hide his arrogance at all. The domineering aura between his brows almost seeped through his skin. The arena was filled with a strange aura that was hard to detect. "In the name of Angus Jeffrey, I sacrifice to summon the Frost Emperor." Angus Jeffrey suddenly raised the magic card in his hand high up in the sky. A crystal-like icy blue radiance was released from the card. Needless to say, the two magic guide spirits in the field turned into light and became sacrifices to summon a higher-level magic guide spirit. An emperor penguin the size of a small mountain rose from the sacrificial summoning circle. The ice crystal crown on its head almost reached the top of the corridor. The nobles in the circular corridor couldn't help but shout in excitement. All of their gazes were focused on the Frost Emperor. This fat penguin, which hadn't been summoned during the duel with Doc, let out an ear-piercing shriek when it appeared. Then, it abruptly raised its stubby lower limbs and used its thick feet to viciously stomp on the opposing magic-guiding fairy. That pitiful magic spirit was stomped to death, and the light of magic scattered in all directions. The Frost Emperor swayed its body and walked to the center of the arena step by step. Its huge body gradually covered the duelist trained by the arena in its shadow. An indescribable fear rose from the bottom of his heart. He couldn't help but take a few steps back and look up at the Frost Emperor's eyes. Suddenly, he screamed and fled the arena before the life enchantment of the Magitech ball was broken. Boom! The Frost Emperor didn't stop, and it stomped on the life barrier of the magic-conducting ball. Beep! The referee suddenly blew his whistle and announced Angus Jeffrey's victory. Intense applause sounded, and the atmosphere in the arena was unimaginably heated. Angus Jeffrey withdrew his enchanted fairy after his victory, leaving behind only a cold assertion before he turned around abruptly. Trash. Dake observed carefully from the corridor and was shocked. Is this still that senior Jeffrey? In just a week, Angus Jeffrey had changed so much that it was shocking. Hey, Dake. The sudden greeting made Dake come back to his senses. He turned around and looked in the direction of the voice. Phyllis Rahman was waving at him. Beside her were Brown Eugenie and several other nobles whom he was more familiar with. Dake rolled his eyes and called Panduola and Aurora to walk toward Phyllis. Phyllis saw him walk over and hurriedly made room for him. The two nobles laughed and got up. They went to the sofa where Phyllis and the others were sitting and put them on the back of the chair. It was quite easy. Dake came to the sofa and asked Panduola and Aurora to sit down. He then sat down and made room for Olga. As a maid, Olga was supposed to stand by the side. But under Dake's signal, she could only sit down. The maid beside her quickly poured tea. Phyllis raised his hand and said enthusiastically, "Why are you free to come to the club today?" Dake nodded and said, "I've been busy for a week and wanted to relax." "You're not with Jeffrey?" "Jeffrey," Phyllis moved the lid of the cup and said meaningfully, "We haven't been together since last time." Dake had a thought and asked, "What happened?" Phyllis smiled and said, "How should I put it? Probably because he was too embarrassed to go out after losing to you. Of course, it's also possible that his father grounded him. Anyway, before this week, we didn't see him at all." "Before this week?" Dake asked. "That means he's been active again since this week." "Yes." Phyllis sighed. "He's not just ordinarily active. If I hadn't known him since I was young, I would have thought that he was a different person." Dake said, "He's become more like a noble." Phyllis was stunned at first, then he carefully tasted it and finally understood. "That's what happened. He's become like an old noble from a few generations ago. Do you know how it feels to look at someone with your nose? It's like that. And his legs are short." "No, I'm just saying that he's not tall. So, if you want to look at someone with your nose, you need to do something else like..." "Dake. Like what?" Phyllis raised his finger and said seriously, "Tools or geographical advantage." "Dake, high heels or standing on high ground?" Phyllis couldn't help but smile and said, "Don't say that in front of him. He's actually quite fragile." "Dake. A heart of glass?" Phyllis's eyes lit up and he said, "Yes, yes, yes, that's the feeling. Linking glass and heart together, it's surprisingly easy to say." Dake asked curiously, "Then how did he become like this?" Phyllis leaned back in his chair and said, "Who knows? Anyway, on Monday, he suddenly appeared in the hall and then challenged the duelists trained by the hall from time to time. No matter who he talked to, he was very aggressive. But some people seemed to like that feeling very much, and some people thought that he suddenly came to his senses and had more value to rely on. Look." Doc followed Phyllis's direction and saw Angus Jeffrey walking up from the entrance. He was surrounded by even more fans than the last time he saw Angus Jeffrey. It was clear that after his personality changed, there were more and more people who thought highly of him. People prefer to follow a tiger, not a poisonous snake. Phyllis's voice drifted out. Dake looked away and said, "Then, do you think this is normal or abnormal?" "Normal or abnormal?" Phyllis was slightly surprised. "What did you see?" But Dake just shook his head and said, "I don't know." He didn't know much about Angus Jeffrey, nor did he have the interest to know. It was just that when he saw the magic duel just now, he faintly felt a trace of dissonance. But he didn't know what exactly the dissonance was. He looked at Panduola beside him and asked, "Senior, what do you think?" Phyllis then noticed that the girl beside him had a breathtaking aura, and hurriedly said, "This is also a top student of the Shang Malian Academy?" Panduola looked at the girl in front of her, who seemed to have walked out of a storybook, and nodded. "I am in the same year as Angus Jeffrey." "Is that so?" Phyllis carefully looked at Panduola, and felt that this girl who was close to her age, looked very familiar. Although she wasn't keen on watching magic duels, the Academy had always been very active in promoting celebrity duelists. Perhaps she had seen Panduola's picture from a female magazine. Panduola didn't continue looking at her, and instead said to Dake, "Angus Jeffrey's behavior just now was very different from when he was in the Academy, but I don't know much about him. Maybe it's just his hidden nature?" Dake looked at Phyllis and asked, "Is that so?" Phyllis pondered for a moment and said, "It's not his true nature, but he does like to disguise himself." "All right." Dake suddenly felt a little disappointed, and said, "Maybe he was enlightened after being lectured by Count Jeffrey. No matter what, it has nothing to do with us. Phyllis, do you want to have dinner with us next?" "Right here?" Phyllis asked. Doc smiled and said, "Let's do it here. I also want to see a shield-bashing performance or a beast-tamer performance." Most of the nobles hanging out with Phyllis didn't have a political stance. Those with emotional intelligence wouldn't talk about things that dampened the mood here. They picked the more popular topics recently, such as the Demon King execution ceremony that had already passed, or some interesting things that happened during the Demon King execution ceremony, and chatted casually. Everyone present was young, and the topics they focused on were always similar, so it was quite fun. However, after a few exchanges of pleasantries, Dake prepared to change the venue. Aurora and Panduola obviously didn't like chatting with so many people, so of course he couldn't continue. However, just as he was about to raise the topic, he suddenly noticed Angus Jeffrey walking over. Upon closer inspection, Angus Jeffrey's temperament had indeed changed. He seemed to have not taken care of his hair for a while, and his brown-blonde hair was dragged behind his head, with only a small ponytail made with a thin string. His facial features were still regular, but there were some dark circles under his eyes, as if he didn't have enough sleep. However, due to his overall temperament, no one noticed the dark circles under his eyes. Angus Jeffrey's eyebrows were cold, and his chin was slightly raised. His gaze was slanted downwards, full of arrogance and indifference. However, when he saw Dake dimming, the coldness instantly disappeared, and his eyes revealed undisguised hatred. Just by looking at each other, Dake knew that the other party didn't come with good intentions. If the previous duel invitation could be said to have maintained a semblance of calm, this time, Angus Jeffrey was no longer trying to hide his intentions. Panduola felt Jeffrey's malice, and leaned close to Dake's ear, whispering, "Does Jeffrey have a grudge against you?" Dake thought for a moment, and whispered, "It should be a matter of political stance. I don't have any grudges against him personally." "Yes, it should be like that." Panduola couldn't help but laugh. "It doesn't look like it to me." Dake shrugged. "At least I don't have a grudge against him." Panduola, "Then he has a grudge against you." Dake, "Who knows?" Phyllis saw them whispering and couldn't help but turn around, and saw Angus Jeffrey walking over. She rolled her eyes and smiled. "Angus, why are you here?" "I came to see, what are you guys talking about?" Angus Jeffrey's voice was a little low. After he walked over, he directly pressed his hand on someone's shoulder, and that person hurriedly stood up to give up his seat. Angus Jeffrey sat down expressionlessly, crossed his arms, and swept his gaze over Dake. When he saw Panduola, his pupils constricted, and the hatred in his eyes receded. Even his tone became gentler. "Dake dimming, do you dare to have another round?" For a moment, the atmosphere was as cold as winter, and the temperature dropped rapidly. Phyllis sighed slightly, not quite understanding Angus Jeffrey's actions. Provoking the son of a duke was an irrational act. If it was in a place like the Academy where one's status wasn't important, then so be it. But in this hall full of nobles, Angus Jeffrey really shouldn't have challenged Dake dimming a second time. Even if he won, what good would it do him? Just to let people know that he had the ability to win against a first-year student? Considering that Jeffrey's condition was really not right, Phyllis didn't even have the desire to watch the show this time. Although she and Jeffrey had known each other since they were young, their relationship wasn't that good. She wanted to persuade him, but there was no one to do so, and looking at Jeffrey's appearance, it was obvious that she couldn't persuade him. Thus, she could only show a helpless expression. Even she felt that there was no way, and a small character like Brown Eugenie naturally couldn't participate. On the other side of the sofa. Dake couldn't help but narrow his eyes, and carefully sized up Angus Jeffrey again. As he got closer, the strange aura on Angus Jeffrey's body became more obvious, but it was just a hazy feeling. That feeling made him feel a little uncomfortable, but he also wanted to explore it. He turned his head slightly, and whispered to Panduola, "Can you feel it?" Panduola narrowed his eyes for a long time, but still shook his head. The two of them completely ignored Angus Jeffrey during their conversation. Jeffrey immediately raised his eyebrows, and said in a low voice, "What, you don't dare?" Dake raised his head slightly helplessly and said, "Senior Jeffrey, have you forgotten even the most basic etiquette?" Jeffrey's expression froze, but he still said firmly, "What, you want me to prepare a white glove?" "Dake, forget it, come on." Seeing that Dake had agreed, Jeffrey's lips curled up, and he sneered, "Don't blame me for being a bully, I'll give you 15 minutes to prepare. After 15 minutes, I'll let you know who is the final winner." Before he finished speaking, he suddenly stood up, turned around, and returned to his own territory. The group of lesser nobles who came with him also left with him. The atmosphere here instantly turned for the better. Phyllis immediately said, "Dake, you can just agree like that, right? Although I don't know much about magic duels, Angus hasn't lost in the past few days, he must have improved greatly." Dake shook his head and said, "Winning and losing is normal, I want to use this duel to investigate him, I want to know why he's so obsessed with duels." Panduola said with concern, "Will it be okay? Jeffrey is a fourth-year student after all." Aurora also frowned and said, "Dake, it's better to be careful, I keep feeling that there's something wrong with that person." Dake smiled and said, "There's only a challenge when there's difficulty, isn't the fun of duels to find the possibility from the impossible?" He then knocked on the card bag, injected magic power, and reminded the magic elves to prepare. 3 minutes later, he called back the magic elves one by one. For a magus, as long as they had a magic card in hand, even if they were thousands of miles away from the magic elves, they could call them back in an instant. And today just so happened to be the weekend. The magic elves were roaming freely in the sea of homework, they wouldn't delay the normal teaching. The only problem was that Paradise and Zoo were still in the room, so compared to 2 weeks ago, there was one less core card in today's deck. But the gap brought by Zoo was made up by Snorlax. So it wasn't a big problem. Dake used the remaining 10 minutes to communicate with the magic elves and replenish his magic. The news that Dake Dimming and Angus Jeffrey were about to have a second magic duel in this hall spread like the wind. 15 minutes was enough for all the guests in the castle to come to the center of the hall. Most of the people here used the result of the duel 2 weeks ago as a joke, so they were very interested in the result of this second magic duel. Unknowingly, the circular corridor was full of noble men and women. But compared to 2 weeks ago, no one dared to look down on the son of the Valkyrie. But Angus Jeffrey's winning streak in the past few days in the hall obviously played a role. There were many people who were optimistic that he would succeed in his revenge. Yes, revenge. No matter how you looked at it, this magic duel was the most popular revenge drama for the masses. The fourth-year student who had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the first-year student after going through a lot of training had shouted, "Life is full of ups and downs, don't look down on a poor youth." Finally, after putting in a lot of effort, he had successfully defeated the first-year student. Wait, why does it sound like something is wrong? Forget it, forget it. In short, there were many people who wanted to see Angus Jeffrey succeed, but there were also many people who wanted to see him defeated by the first-year student again. If it wasn't for the sensitive identity of the two duels, the management of the hall would have opened the door. But even if the door wasn't opened, the men and women present were in high spirits, full of anticipation for this duel. Feeling the mood of the audience, Dake Dimming certainly wouldn't be disappointed. After he was ready, he stood up from his seat and prepared to walk to the protruding platform. At the same time, a maid hurried over and said to him, "Mr. Dimming, Mr. Jeffrey has proposed a duel in the arena below. May I ask if it is possible?" Doc furrowed his brows, feeling a little wary of Jeffrey's sudden suggestion. However, after careful consideration, he still nodded at the female attendant and said, "No problem." The maid quickly said, I will go and inform Mr. Jeffrey. If you are not familiar with the route, you can let Jessica lead the way." After saying that, she hurriedly left. Dake paused for a moment, then raised his hand to Panduola and the other two and said, "Then I will go down. I will go with the young master." Olga stood up. Dake's heart skipped a beat, then he nodded and said, "Okay, then I will leave Aurora in your care." Panduola smiled and said, "No problem." Dake smiled at them, then turned to Jessica and said, "Please lead the way." With Jessica leading the way, Dake and Olga quickly entered the corridor that led to the arena. Olga only then said softly, "Young master, if you feel anything strange, please immediately stop the duel." Dake nodded and said, "I will." The corridor was very quiet, and the sound of footsteps gradually descended. Soon, when the hubbub of voices could be heard again, the light of the arena came into view. Dake Dimming walked out of the corridor, followed by a beautiful maid and a proper maid. He raised his head slightly and saw Angus Jeffrey's figure appear at the entrance of the road directly opposite him. There was no one following Jeffrey. After he walked out of the corridor, he looked at Dake and smiled silently. Then, the tiles on both sides suddenly moved away, and the contestant platforms gradually rose. This arena often held exhibition matches for magician duels, so it had all the necessary facilities. When the contestant platforms were completely raised, a circular plate in the summoning area of the arena dropped down, and a magic-conducting ball drilled out of a circular hole, quietly floating 1/2 meter in the air. Then, the circular plate rose again and filled the hole. Then, a platform 5 meters high popped out from the sidewall. A referee in a red suit and a female commentator in a blue suit walked up to the platform at the same time. Compared to the duel 2 weeks ago, the duel this time was clearly more formal. Is this why they came down to the arena? Doc pondered for a moment, then ignored Angus Jeffrey's provocation and walked up to the red team's platform. As for Angus Jeffrey, he walked up to the blue side's platform. Both contestants activated the card tables on the platforms at the same time, and a magic-conducting projection appeared, along with a loudspeaker. Angus Jeffrey suddenly looked at Dake and said, "Dimming." "Yes," Dake casually replied and put the cards into the card slots on the table. Before the 30-second countdown of the preparation phase began, both contestants had plenty of time to communicate. However, most people would not use this time to their advantage. Relying on one's own strength and luck, and not trash talk and other offstage tactics to win, was the way most duelists were reserved. However, Angus Jeffrey clearly had a lot of things he needed to vent. As a benevolent, righteous, courteous, kind, respectful, and thrifty junior, Dake naturally did not mind him revealing more during the conversation. It was best to say all the things that should be said and should not be said. Angus Jeffrey saw that he was not nervous at all, and the coldness in his eyes grew colder. He lowered his voice and said, "Do you think this duel is easy?" Dake did not expect Jeffrey to suddenly say such a thing, so he asked, "Why do you think so?" Angus Jeffrey suddenly raised his voice and said, "Because you have never lost." Dake shook his head calmly and said, "No, I have lost." "Impossible." Angus Jeffrey immediately denied. "I have been paying attention to you since you joined the duel club. Whether it was the second year Elsie Kevin, or the third year Michael Owen, Stuart Phone, or Tom Nixon, none of them could stop you. You have never experienced the feeling of losing, so how would you know the difficulty of a duel?" There was also a fourth-year student called Angus Jeffrey. Dake silently rolled his eyes. If the scope of duel was defined as magic-conducting duel, he had indeed never lost. However, what was the necessary connection between never losing and think this duel is easy? Although Angus Jeffrey's expression was still normal, Dake could faintly hear a trace of hysteria in his forced logic. He thought for a moment, and simply agreed. "Senior Jeffrey, if it is only limited to magic-conducting duels, I have indeed never lost. However, isn't a magic-conducting duel supposed to be a relaxing and joyful event that brings smiles to everyone? Why are you so hung up on its difficulty?" Angus Jeffrey suddenly raised his head and said proudly, "Because a duel is a serious, solemn, and noble event. Its difficulty, its importance, its competitiveness, all of these are its charm. People like you who do not even know the difficulty of a duel do not deserve to win." Dake was even more confused. He immediately asked, "Senior Geoffrey, is a duel so important to you?" Angus Geoffrey sneered. "Of course it is important. Duels are my life, my future, and I was born for duels. Anyone who does not respect a duel will pay the price. Including you, Dake Dimming." Then, he suddenly placed the deck in his hand into the card slot. Following the sound of shuffling cards, he raised his chin again and said angrily, "Dake Dimming, do you accept my challenge?" Dake: "Yes, I accept." Thus, in an instant, a grey flame suddenly ignited on Angus Geoffrey's forehead. The flame soared into the sky, and then suddenly elongated into a grey line. In the blink of an eye, it had circled the arena, causing the grey flame to ignite at the edge of the arena. A strange aura instantly filled the air. Dake's eyes opened wide. He clearly saw the grey flame, and a sense of familiarity rose in his heart. Then, he looked around and immediately confirmed that apart from the two dueling parties, no one else could see the grey flame. 5 in 1 10,000 plus. 0127/233 Brothers. Don't waste the guaranteed monthly votes and blades. 3. Chapter 517. In the circular corridor, Panduola placed her hands on the railing and looked down at the arena coldly. Aurora and Felix were by her side. The two of them were also looking down, turning a blind eye to the burning grey flames. Instead, it was the conversation between Dake and Angus Geoffrey that made them suspicious. The rest of the audience were the same. Angus Geoffrey's words were too exaggerated. "Duels are my life," and "I was born for duels" didn't sound like something he would say. Some people even blurted out that there was something wrong with Angus Geoffrey's brain. Of course, some people were more concerned about Dake Diming's undefeated record. The names that came out of Angus Geoffrey's mouth were not unknown people. Those who liked to watch the matches in the Shangmalian Academy's duel hall would more or less know these names. Although they were all second and third-year students, the best of each year had the ability to fight above their level. Just like Dake Dimming in front of them, his strength couldn't be measured by his age. Remember the URL. M. Vipkanshu. 6. However, Dark Diamond's battle record was indeed a little too exaggerated. One had to know that he had just graduated from first year. Those noble men and women wouldn't forget that Angus Geoffrey had also lost to him. Of course, this was Angus Geoffrey's battle to take revenge. Although Angus Geoffrey's words were a little confusing, his confidence were revealed. Therefore, there were a few more people who thought highly of him. Of course, this was only before the duel began. Once the duel began and both sides showed signs of victory, then they would change their minds at any time. After Dake confirmed that no one else could see the flames, he decisively did something. He immediately shouted, "Olga, do it!" In his hearing, this loud shout resounded through the venue through the loudspeaker. However, whether it was the audience above or Olga below, no one had any reaction. After seeing this, Angus Geoffrey sneered, "Don't waste your energy. Within my dual domain, no one will be able to detect your abnormality." Dake's heart sank. He immediately realized the additional effect of the grey flames. Within the range of the grey flames, any words or actions that wanted to reveal information about the grey flames would be changed, making it impossible for others to detect the abnormality. This wasn't the first time Angus Geoffrey had used this dual domain. The previous duelist trained by the hall was obviously one of the victims. Looking at the way that person fled in fear, he probably lost all memories of the grey flames after the duel. It was even possible that he lost more than just his memories. Angus Geoffrey's dual domain was extremely similar to the dark duel in Dark Diamond's impression. I wonder how fair this dual domain is? Will it be like the dark duel, with a clear bias? Dake's brain was spinning rapidly. After only half a minute, he immediately made his next move. He tried to walk down the stage. However, when he reached the edge of the stairs, the grey flames suddenly jumped up, as if wanting to burn him to ashes. Dake subconsciously retracted his foot, and saw the grey flames shrink back. Angus Jeffrey crossed his arms and looked at Dake's actions. He sneered again. It seems that when faced with the fear of the unknown, you are no different from ordinary people. Dake's mouth twitched. He turned back to the card table and smiled. I am an ordinary person. Let me guess, you obtained this ability after last weekend, right? Angus Jeffrey's eyebrows twitched. He subconsciously gritted his teeth, but he quickly concealed it. You think I will reveal information to you? I will not divulge anything related to the dual domain to you, including its rules. Dake Dimming, carry the fear of the unknown with you and feel the pain of defeat. Dake raised his head slightly and found that the referee and commentator on the platform had no reaction to what he had said. He immediately confirmed the effectiveness of the grey flames. As for the rules within the dual domain, since it was a duel, no matter what the rules were, they couldn't escape the 8 words, the winner is the king, the loser is the bandit. As long as he won, so what if he didn't know the rules? Moreover, the dual domain defined by the grey flames might not necessarily be unbreakable. His fingertips touched the magic card in the card slot, thinking quickly in his mind. Angus Jeffrey's sudden change in timing, his inexplicable strong obsession with the dual domain, the strange logic that forced it all together, and the strange feeling brought about by the grey flames. The signs were already very obvious. Did something leak out from the underworld and attach itself to his body? Dake quickly calmed down as he pondered. Just as Angus Jeffrey had said, the unknown could indeed bring fear. But he wasn't completely ignorant. He collected information, carried out inference, and finally got the answer. He was sure that what he knew was much more than what Angus Jeffrey had imagined. That would explain why the grey flames, which didn't have strong energy fluctuations, could obscure the perception of everyone, including Panduola and Olga. Because it was something from the underworld. The underworld and the present world. The dead and the living. There was an insurmountable wall between the two. After the twilight of the gods. Before the real death, the living would never be able to understand the world of the dead. Even with the heritage of the Holy Church, the underworld was ominous. Only a very small number of races knew about the underworld. Among these very small number of races, the Devil Clan was the majority. The lack of knowledge was the biggest reason why the human perception couldn't break through the grey flames. In this dual domain, if I lose the duel, I will lose some things, including part of my memory. What if I win the duel? Dake's thinking was broad enough that he quickly thought of this. Then, he suddenly became interested in the dark duel, in the dual domain. No rush. Dake's eyes were surging with excitement. This dual domain was similar to a ritual. The loser would pay the price, and the winner would naturally get the benefits. Angus Jeffrey saw Dake's expression change from confusion to excitement with his own eyes, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He quickly realized that Dake Dimeng was different from the other duelists he had defeated in the past few days. The grey flame on his forehead flickered slightly under the agitation of various emotions. On the platform, the commentator, who knew nothing about the real exchange between the two contestants, was already giving a simple introduction to the two contestants. This female commentator, who was specially trained by the club, was wearing a dark blue suit, but the collar was wide open, completely exposing her deep cleavage. Her eyebrows were picturesque, her nose was high, her lips were red, and her chestnut-colored hair was straight to her waist. The tailored suit on her perfectly accentuated the curves of her body, making her look even more sensual. I'm sure everyone here has a good understanding of the two contestants, so without further ado, let's turn the focus to the duel itself. Let's see which contestant will dominate the duel and obtain the final victory. Let the match begin. Beep. The referee followed the commentator's announcement and blew the whistle. The dual domain, which was completely different from the dual domain, had officially begun. Preparation stage. 30s. A projection of a 30-second countdown suddenly appeared above the arena. Dake didn't overthink the start of the duel because he was overthinking. He said as he drew his card, "Senior Jeffrey, I really want to know what the loser has to pay, can you tell me? I hope you can still laugh when the time comes." Jeffrey snorted and drew his card. From the grey flame on his forehead, A cold aura constantly flowed into his mind, allowing him to remain calm at all times. In this state, his thoughts wouldn't be hindered by his emotions, and he could do as he wished, giving him an unyielding will. Even if the magic sphere's life enchantment only had 1 mana left, he could still calmly launch the fiercest counterattack. Both contestants drew their cards almost at the same time. After Dake drew his 5 cards, he immediately fanned them out and looked at them quickly. Kettle Kettle, Lightbringer, Dream Demon, Bliss 3, Moon Change, Curse Cage, Little Devil Magical Beast, Kettle Kettle. Dake's eyes flashed, and he immediately drew Kettle Kettle. After the last duel, he had a general understanding of Angus Jeffrey's deck. As a top student in the 4th grade, Angus Jeffrey had a large number of chains that allowed him to quickly recruit high-star magic elves. Last time, Dake's strong luck played a large part in suppressing Angus Jeffrey. If he didn't find a strong enough magic elven card in the early stages, he might not have been able to block the 5-star magic elven monster's attack in the first wave. But this time, with Kettle Kettle in his hand, nothing would be a problem. At the critical moment, he could use Bliss 3, Moon Change, to induce the Dream Demon or the Little Devil Magical Beast to evolve to deal with the crisis. When the Little Devil Magical Beast evolved into a Heidi Road beast with 2 hands and 2 legs, the Lightbringer would be useful. Therefore, the 5 magic elven cards he drew were not bad. But when he was ready, he suddenly heard Angus Jeffrey's maniacal laughter. Angus Jeffrey, whose forehead was burning with grey fire, released his malice without any scruples. He glared fiercely at Dake, and from the 5 cards in his hand, he suddenly drew one of them and sneered. It seems that the goddess of fate is not on your side. What awaits you will be the evil spirit on the road to the underworld. As soon as he finished speaking, the 30-second countdown of the preparation phase had ended. Tick. The countdown for the first round of the battle phase began instantly. The moment both contestants heard the sound, they immediately cast their usual summoning spells. In the name of Dake Dim-Eng, Magic Elven Summoning. In the name of Angus Jeffrey, Magic Elven Summoning. Without a doubt. At the beginning of the first round, both contestants chose to summon their first-tier Magic Elven Summoning. Angus Jeffrey did not use the same tactic as last time, which was to summon Frigid Earth. As the 2 summoning lights fell into the red and blue summoning zones, the Magic Elven Summoning appeared at the same time. The one that appeared in the red summoning zone was a Magic Elven Summoning that looked like a tortoise. Only those who were more knowledgeable could see that it was not a tortoise, but a worm. Bash. Amidst the solemn chirping, Master Kettle poked its yellow head out of the hole in its red hard shell, and then its 4 soft tentacle-like limbs came out. A quarter of an hour ago, it was still struggling with its homework in its room, but now it was standing in the middle of the duel. As Dake Diming's usual starter, Kettle's ability and mentality were unquestionable, and it was enough to be entrusted with Dake's trust. But the one that appeared in the blue summoning zone was a Magic Elven Summoning that looked like a small coffin. The Magic Elven Summoning was made of sparkling and translucent ice, and it emitted a white mist condensed from cold air. It was as if something was struggling to come out from within, trembling from time to time. "It's the Netherworld Ice Coffin," the commentator on the platform suddenly shouted. In the past few days of duels, contestant Angus Jeffrey has shown us the wonders of this Magic Elven Summoning many times. Its sure kill skill, the Netherworld Path, can summon the wandering spirits of the Netherworld Death Path. The audience, who had some understanding of the Netherworld Ice Coffin, couldn't help but show a trace of pity. It was no secret that Angus Jeffrey was able to use the Netherworld Ice Coffin as a springboard to summon the 7-star Magic Elven Summoning Frost Lich from the deck. As a 4th-year student of the Shang Malian Academy, Angus Jeffrey's ability had already been revealed. At this moment, even if a student of a higher year were to stand in front of Angus Jeffrey, it would be extremely difficult to find a way to break through. Not to mention a mere first-year student. Even Panduola couldn't help but feel worried for Dake. Although the Kettle Kettle was an extremely powerful Magic Elven Summoning card, it actually didn't have the ability to deal with the sure kill skill of the Magic Elven Summoning card. If it were to forcefully rely on its defense, it would most likely not be able to withstand the Frost Lich's long-range attack. On the red team's platform. Dake Dimming didn't seem to be the slightest bit flustered. With his previous experience, he clearly knew that it would take at least 10 seconds for the Frost Lich to break out of the underworld ice coffin. And these 10 seconds were enough for him to summon again. In the name of Dake Dimming, magic elven summoning, come out, Dream Demon. In less than 7 seconds after the Netherworld ice coffin was summoned, Dake had already successfully summoned the Dream Demon. Little Mimi, the dark green, ghost-like little cutie, directly appeared in mid-air. It curiously observed its surroundings and spun around in the air, looking innocent and cute. Of course, if anyone was deceived by its harmless appearance, they would most likely have nightmares at night. Dream Demon, hide. Taking advantage of the cool-down time of the summoning, Dake lightly said. The little Dream Demon immediately went into the kettle's hole and merged with it. After summoning the Netherworld ice coffin, Angus Jeffrey didn't stop there. He also used a normal summoning spell for the second time. In the blue team summoning area, a small snow-white bear like a doll was slowly crawling up. Sleeved White Bear, Hidden Snow. Although it was a 3-star magic elven summoning card, the Sleeved White Bear only existed as a sacrifice in Jeffrey's deck. Its sure kill skill, Hidden Snow, could make it invisible. As the snowflakes fell, the Sleeved White Bear's figure quickly disappeared. This was a backup plan that Angus Jeffrey had buried just in case. Then, 3 seconds later, the 10-second countdown above the Netherworld ice coffin completely reached 0. In that instant, the ice coffin cover suddenly shattered from the inside out. An ear-piercing scream pierced through the sky. Extremely cold air exploded from the ice coffin. The cold air was so fierce that it even caused the temperature in the area to plummet. The elegant Frost Lich sat up straight in the underworld ice coffin. It was tall and had astonishing curves. Its Chong Sam-like long dress clung to its skin. The exposed skin was shockingly pale, and there were faint blue blood flowing through its veins and under its skin. When the scream stopped, the Ice Lich closed its mouth and raised its slender arm, putting the ice crown on its head back on. The other sure-kill skill of the Netherworld ice coffin, Man in the Coffin, was used at this moment. A ring of glowing icicles appeared around the Ice Lich's body. This ring of Netherworld Ice Ring could increase the effectiveness of the Ice Lich's Ice-type and Ghost-type sure-kill skills by nearly 50% for a short period of time. Although it didn't have the Frost Scepter in its hand this time, the Ice Lich's magic burst ability had increased to a shocking degree. Frost Burst. Before the Frost Lich walked out of the ice coffin, Angus Jeffrey yelled. In an instant, the Ice Lich raised its right hand, and countless cold lights poured into its palm from the Netherworld ice ring, turning into a cold whirlpool. Then, it suddenly waved its hand, and the whirlpool in its palm turned into a wave of ice that rushed out. Wherever the wave of ice passed, frost condensed and spread, freezing more than half of the area. When the wave of ice disappeared, Kettle, who was blocking in front of the red magic ball, had turned into an ice sculpture. The magic ball behind it couldn't completely dodge the Frost Burst's attack, and half of its barrier was frozen. Even though the power of the attack had been weakened, the red cube's HP had dropped from 8,000 to 6,100. Feel the pain. Angus Jeffrey's voice suddenly became louder, and a slightly crazy smile appeared on his face. On the red team's platform. When the red magic ball's life barrier was attacked, Dake's expression changed. He felt an extremely cold attack, and a sharp pain exploded in his chest. It was as if he was attacked by the Frost Burst. He suddenly grabbed his chest, and a trace of anger flashed in his eyes. Rage +1. The cold and the sharp pain made him understand more about the dual domain. If he didn't understand the nature of the dark game, he would have most likely fallen into fear. But now, he relied on his strong self-control to successfully control his emotions, and he immediately began to use the normal summoning spell. This third summoning should have been completed, but it was interrupted by the sudden sharp pain. Fortunately, the Frost Lich didn't have the Frost Scepter, so it couldn't continuously use the Frost Burst a second time. Although Kettle was frozen, the Dream Demon, hidden in its body, was lucky enough to survive. As the red light of the Gem of Fear shone from within, the ice on the surface of Kettle's body cracked inch by inch. Relying on the sure kill skill Sturdy, it managed to survive. However, it only had 1 point of magic left out of its 900 points. This meant that it couldn't use any sure kill skills. Even if it was used as a sacrifice, the success rate of the sacrifice was almost 0. Therefore, although it was still alive, it was already dead. Unless Dake could get an energy potion. But its mission was completed. Not only did it protect the Dream Demon from the terrifying explosion of the 7-star Magic Fairy, it also weakened the Magic Ball's damage, and it also changed the sure kill skill of the Frost Lich. When the light of bliss shone from the sky, it knew that its mission was completed. Next, it was the Dream Demon's home ground. Dake Diming's unusual calmness shocked Angus Jeffrey. Before this duel, every duelist who had dueled with him would feel fear after experiencing pain, which would greatly affect their subsequent performance. However, Dark, who was only 13 years old, gritted his teeth and endured the pain after letting out a painful cry. This calmness almost made him think that his opponent already knew the secret of the duel domain. However, Dake's probing before the duel told him that he didn't know. Since that was the case, it could only be explained that his mental fortitude was too strong. Let's see how long you can endure. Angus Jeffrey couldn't help but grit his teeth. The more the Magic Fairy's life barrier decreased, the more pain the duelist would have to endure. This kind of continuous and gradual pain would cause almost everyone to collapse. He didn't believe that a 13-year-old spoiled brat could endure it forever. Angus Jeffrey suddenly shouted, "Frost Lich, kill him!" The Frost Lich, that had lost its most powerful attack, still had a sure kill defensive skill and a sure kill control skill. Even in close combat, it wouldn't be weaker than a 5-star or 6-star Magic Fairy. It was a pity that after the Underworld Ice Coffin was broken, its magic power would drop to the lowest point, and it would lose the possibility of being used as a sacrifice. Otherwise, he could still rely on the Underworld Ice Coffin and the Sleeved Bear to summon a 6-star Magic Fairy. Now, he could only continue to bury his pawns and wait for the second round to begin. Of course, the prerequisite was that Dake Dimeng could survive the first round. Angus Jeffrey stared at the arena and turned the third magic card to his right hand. However, while he was thinking, the Dream Demon, bathed in the light of bliss, rapidly evolved, turning from its original childlike appearance to a more mature girl. When the pink light was completely absorbed, it had already turned into a magical girl wearing a pointed hat. It was as if a Dream Demon, that had walked out from the abyss of hell, exuding a powerful aura that far exceeded the stars. A 5-star Dream Demon, and a 7-star Frost Lich. The difference in their attributes wasn't as big as expected. The Dream Demon's magic attack and defense were 2700, 2500, 1600. The Frost Lich's magic attack and defense were only 3500, 2500, 2000. Both of them were undying species and had the ghost attribute. In terms of appearance, the Frost Lich was more mature. At this moment, the female commentator on the platform was speechless. She didn't know why Kettle didn't die, nor did she know why the Dream Demon could evolve into a Dream Demon. Of course, under such an anxious situation, no one would pay attention to her. At this moment, Dake Dimeng, who had experienced the cruel side of the dark duel, had lost the patience to deal with Angus Jeffrey. He stretched out his hand and decisively ordered, "Dream Demon, open up the space." Demonic Mimi, Heartsuit, the Dream Demon, didn't feel the slightest bit of danger in the atmosphere. After it coquettishly called out, it abruptly spread out its tentacles and unleashed its killing move, Nightmare Realm. In an instant, thick purple smoke erupted from beneath his body, spreading out in all directions in a seemingly slow but fast manner. In the blink of an eye, the thick purple smoke covered the entire red side of the arena and continued to spread towards the blue side. Could it be another arena-type killing move? Angus Jeffrey, who had experienced the pain of the Sin World during his previous duel with Dake, had a very bad premonition. And his premonition was obviously correct. Following his orders, the Frost Lich, that was rapidly sliding towards Dake on the ice surface, suddenly became like a tortoise crawling in a quagmire. Originally, with its speed, it could quickly break into the red side summoning area, but now it only felt that the red side summoning area was getting further and further away from it. Following that, it suddenly saw a ray of red light flying from its right side, attacking its side like lightning. Hiss! The Frost Lich didn't slow down in its attack speed, it instantly opened its sharp claws and viciously clawed at the red light. But the real piercing pain came from its left side, leaving a deep wound on its body. Magic power violently leaked out. Its ferocious claws grabbed nothing but air. That beam of red light also flickered, disappearing without a trace. Ah! The Frost Lich suddenly howled, its claws frantically clawing at its surroundings, but to no avail. With its intelligence level, it couldn't possibly figure out what was going on. The Dream Demon's figure had already disappeared from the Nightmare Realm, without a trace. As it grasped more knowledge, its utilization of the Nightmare Realm was no longer the same as before. Ah! The Frost Lich only saw that ray of red light once again appearing in front of its eyes, but a sharp pain came from its back. Another wound appeared on its back. The Dream Demoness laughter echoed in the Nightmare Realm. An aura that made people shudder gradually spread out. It's an illusory realm technique. On the Blue Side's platform, Angus Jeffrey tightly grasped the magic card in his hand. Illusions and illusory realm techniques were extremely troublesome to deal with, sometimes even more terrifying than stealth. But a magic fairy with such a technique was extremely rare. Angus Jeffrey had some impression of the Dream Demon, and knew that Dake had summoned it before. But only now did he know that this magic fairy actually had such a terrifying technique. Frost Lich, use Frost Magic Shield. The icy chill from the grey flame on his forehead allowed him to act calmly even when his emotions were in turmoil. The magic card in his hand had already completed its summoning. In the Blue Side summoning area, a brand new magic fairy had already appeared. It was a magic fairy in the shape of a snowball. Its overall appearance was like a snow slime, but in reality it wasn't. Card name, Liyuan Snow Essence. Type, Fairy Card. Level, ****. Race, Elemental. Attribute, Ice. Magic Power, 1000. Attack, 0. Defense, 2000. Killing Skills, Elemental Regeneration, Snowball. The Liyuan Snow Essence, with an attack of 0, had a defense that surpassed the top 3 stars. Its killing skill, Elemental Regeneration, allowed it to regenerate in an environment with a high concentration of ice elements. As for the killing skill, Snowball, it could only be used in a snowy environment. It could make it gradually grow larger in the process of rolling, and its original 0 attack would also gradually increase until it reached the upper limit of 3,000 points. Without a doubt, this Liyuan Snow Essence was just like the Liyuan Ice Essence that had the Ice Elemental Heart. It was an extremely rare and powerful magic guide spirit. But in the current environment, it couldn't use its killing skills. Angus Jeffrey stretched out his hand and ordered, "Liyuan Snow Essence, protect the magic crystal ball." Thus, the magic fairy immediately stuffed the blue magic crystal ball into its body, which was equivalent to providing it with 2,000 points of defense. It seemed that Jeffrey was guarding against the sudden attack of the Dream Demon. At the same time, after the Frost Magic Shield, the Frost Magic Shield's defense increased to 2,750 points, and it also obtained a 37.5% damage reduction effect. In addition, the Frost Magic Shield could also cause a small amount of frost damage to the opponent in close range. It had to be said that this was the correct response. The Dream Demon, with only 2,500 points of attack, could no longer cause any effective damage to the Dream Demon. However, the Dream Demon's erratic movements made the Frost Lich completely unable to catch it, and both sides entered a stalemate. Tick! The sound of the turn changing suddenly rang out. The two duelists who were fully focused reached out their hands to draw cards. The next 2 magic cards will be the key to breaking this stalemate. Dake immediately added the 2 magic cards into his hand. Energy Potion. Moon God Soul Eye. Energy Potion. Dake's eyes flashed, and he immediately began to summon. In the name of Dake Dim Eng, magic summoning. 3 seconds later, a round flask filled with a blue and white potion fell from the sky. On the ground, the dispirited kettle slightly raised its head and smashed the flask. As the blue and white liquid sprinkled down, its magic instantly recovered to 201 points. Bzzz. Kettle's eyes focused. Relying on strength cantrip and equal defense, it could immediately reduce the Frost Lich's defense, and then the Dream Demon could take advantage of the gap to attack. It quickly calculated the various values in its mind. With the Frost Lich's base defense of 2,000 points, it would be 1,000 points after being halved. With the Frost Magic Shield and Underworld Ice Ring's buff, it would be 1,375 points. The Dream Demon's attack was 2,500 points, and one hit could cause around 1125 points of damage. The Frost Lich should have around 2,500 points of magic left. If it was only the Dream Demon attacking alone, it would need 3 hits to kill it. However, the Dream Demon was not the only one in the red team summoning area. After accurately calculating, Kettle once again called out and immediately began to use its ultimate skill, Strength Cantrip. Its ultimate skill had an area limit, but it could basically be used in the red team summoning area. As the light of its ability shone, Kettle's attack and defense first completed the exchange. Then, when its defense became 0, it used its ultimate skill, Equal Defense, on the Frost Lich. The Frost Lich's defense instantly fell. Demon Mimi. The Dream Demon, who understood Kettle's ability thoroughly, did not hesitate to charge at the Frost Lich. The same red light flashed, and the same invisible attack. The Frost Lich could not differentiate between real and fake. Although its master knew that the red light was only used to lure it, it could not tell where the Dream Demon was, let alone command it. The Frost Magic Shield of the Frost Lich was completely torn apart. It immediately let out a hurried scream and injected magic into the Frost Magic Shield that was about to disappear. But in the next moment, its eyes suddenly widened, and it once again saw a red light mixed with yellow rushing towards it like lightning. At that moment, it realized that the red lightning this time should be real, and it wanted to use Sinister Gaze with its magic. However, the speed of the red lightning was too fast, and it could not react at all. The Frost Magic Shield that it had just injected some magic into was completely torn apart. Then, the Dream Demon appeared behind it and turned around to attack with its claws. Hiss! This 7-star Frost Lich was actually turned into magic and dissipated under the toying of the 2 magic elves. At this moment, there was an uproar in the circular corridor. However, the situation was so tense that it was suffocating. Other than the exclamations, there was no discussion. Angus Jeffrey finally drew a venue card, but he chose to summon another 6-star magic elven card. However, he did not expect that when he sacrificed the 6-star magic elven card to summon the Frost Magic Shield would be killed so easily. If it was in the past, he would definitely lose control of his emotions the moment the Frost Lich was killed. But now, he was like a schizophrenic. While he was shocked and angry, he calmly carried out the operation. The sleeved white bear and Leon's snow essence on the field turned into light and merged with the light released from the magic elven card to form a huge sacrificial summoning array. That 6-star magic guiding fairy had been successfully summoned. Card name, Leon Fog Demon. Type, Elven card, level, race, Undying, attribute, Spectre/Ice, magic, 3000, attack, 2500, defense, 1000, ultimate skill, Body of Mist, Distant Plains Ice Mist, Beheading in the Mist. What appeared in everyone's vision was shockingly a ball of icy fog emitting a faint blue radiance. The fog floated in the air, and there were 3 pitch-black holes in what seemed to be its face. The wind that blew through the holes made a whistling sound, and it was eerie and cold. Angus Jeffrey abruptly slammed the table and shouted in a deep voice, "Let the icy mist of the Desert of Separation enter this place and completely destroy that illusory world." Hoo! The wind whistled, like the wailing of ghosts and howling of wolves. The Liyuan fog demon immediately blew out the icy fog. The same bewildering barrier effect surged from the blue half to the red half. The nightmare realm that had already forced its way into the blue half was instantly obstructed by the icy fog emitting a faint blue radiance. The icy fog became thicker and thicker, and soon it covered the entire blue half. Looking down from above, the arena was separated into two worlds by the purple fog and the blue icy fog. The playful laughter of the dream demon and the ghostly wailing of the Liyuan fog demon resounded simultaneously. The nightmare realm did not disperse like Angus Jeffrey expected, it was dispersed by the Liyuan ice fog. He fiercely picked up that field card, preparing to summon it after the cooldown ended. At the same time, he had already ordered the fog beheading to the Liyuan fog beheading. Dake also said to the dream demon, Confusion tactic. Using a 5-star magical guide sprite to fight against a 6-star magical guide sprite, it was originally unwise. Furthermore, he did not know anything about the 6-star magical guide sprite. Now that Hu had sacrificed himself, he was left with only a dream demon. Although it was sufficient to defend, it was insufficient to attack. He might as well wait for the next round to consider. Of course, if Angus Jeffrey chose to initiate an attack, he would not mind letting him taste the pain of the curse. As soon as he finished speaking, the Liyuan fog demon instantly dived into the icy fog. Its figure flashed, and the Liyuan fog demon completely disappeared. Its body blended into the fog, stealthily moving without a trace. The icy fog at the intersection between the Liyuan ice fog and the nightmare realm suddenly gathered and ferociously drilled into the nightmare realm. 5 in 1 10,000 plus. 0130/233 Brothers. Cast your minimum monthly votes and razor blades. 3. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.